It all started back at the middle school. Someone was calling out to a girl named Lee Eun-so. She stopped. It was another girl yelling at her, telling her to stay away from other people's boyfriends. She just wanted Eun-seo's attention. But Eun-seo ignored her. This wasn't the first time something like this happened. She tried to push those thoughts away. Frowning, she walked on. Why would that girl even say that when they'd already broken up a long time ago? Suddenly, a boy's voice asked why she was leaving so late, if something had happened. And there it was, the root of all her problems, Kang Si-hwa. That thought immediately crossed Eun-seo's mind. The boy added that he had been waiting for her. Sitting in the car, she thought about how he was the main reason for all this loud, messy drama in her life. Kang Si-hwa had inherited only the best from his father, a famous top actor, good looks, and a kind personality. It wasn't even about his good grades, just his very existence seemed to shine, just like his name. Being too close to this sun, Eun-seo thought, would only burn her up. The fact that everyone called him the sun, it was ridiculous. To her, this boy was simply the sun that scorched her peace of mind, the root of all her misfortune. In other words, he was her childhood friend. They'd known each other for 16 years. So close, it sometimes felt suffocating. The only things they didn't share were her sports and his piano lessons. Other than that, everything was always together. Wasn't that too much? No matter how close their moms were, did it really have to keep going like this? Through high school and now even into college? Suddenly, Eun-seo noticed that Si-hwa's face had changed. She asked if he'd gotten a weird message. Putting his phone away, he said it was fine. Then he asked if she knew their tutoring session had been rescheduled. She shook her head. There hadn't been any messages in the group chat. She was actually glad. She'd get to rest instead. But Si-hwa pointed out that today was the girl's birthday, and instead of lessons, they should throw a party. He rolled down the car window, letting rays of sunlight spill into the tinted car, and kept talking. He said his mom had been making her favorite, strawberry cake, all morning, but Eun-seo wasn't really listening. She was caught up, staring at Si-hwa's face lit up by the sunlight streaming in. He was always shining, like the sun. Everyone who met him loved that light. Eun-seo wasn't an exception. Sitting at the table, she blew out her candles while her friend and his mom sang, "Happy birthday." Once the cake was cut, Si-hwa's mom handed her a small box, saying it was a gift for her. Inside was a delicate gold chain with a small ring-shaped charm set with a tiny stone. Eun-seo was stunned. It was the piece of jewelry she'd wanted for a long time. She asked how she had known. His mom explained that she'd worried whether the pendant might get in the way during sports. She was about to continue, but the maid called her away and she left the two of them alone. Once the room was quiet, Eun-seo reached her hand out toward Si-hwa, but he wouldn't look at her. Finally, he glanced at her hand and asked what she wanted. Did she want him to take her hand? She said no. She was waiting for his gift. He replied that it was already right in front of her. Eun-seo didn't understand. She hoped he was joking, because who comes to her birthday without a gift? He asked if she wanted something else besides the necklace. After all, you have to know what you want before someone can give it. He said she had until the end of the day to tell him what she wanted from him. Thinking for a moment, she admitted that she'd always thought their bond was special, just like him. Blushing, she continued and asked if they could start dating. She really believed he liked her back. She had never seen him so shocked. He literally choked on the tea he was about to drink. He spit it all out after hearing her words. Her eyes widened at his reaction. Flustered, Eun-seo tried to play it off as a joke, hiding her true feelings behind fear and shame. She quickly excused herself, saying she'd go grab some napkins. Her heart was pounding so loud it filled her head. Her mouth just moved on its own, desperate to escape the moment. In the bathroom, she stared into her big eyes, filling with tears. A wave of shame washed over her. That birthday became her worst memory. After that, they both pretended it had never happened. That day, she made a promise to herself. She would never confess her love first. That way, her relationships would never break like this one did. But even that plan failed. Now, Lee Eun-seo was 22, a junior in college, majoring in physical education major. She had long forgotten about him. He'd gone abroad to study so long ago, she didn't even know what his life looked like now. Time is cruel. They had been friends since childhood. For as long as she could remember, she had been in love with him. Meanwhile, the professor wrapped up his opening remarks and began roll call. It was time to start class. But Eun-seo was lost in her own thoughts. She couldn't even tell how many years it had taken just to let go of those feelings. The professor began calling roll, but Eun-so was distracted by a message from her friend. Suddenly, the name Kang Si-hwa was called, and she froze. Goosebumps ran all over her body. Did she hear that right? Then a male voice spoke to her, asking if she was pretending not to recognize him on purpose. Looking up, Eun-so saw a familiar face. It was Kang Si-hwa, her childhood friend. She couldn't believe her eyes. And in that moment, she started doubting whether she had really moved on from her feelings. Hesitantly, she whispered his name. Smiling, he simply confirmed that yes, it was him. That was when she realized all those so-called forgotten feelings were nothing but an illusion. Eun-so tried to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Hearing their voices, the professor told them to quiet down. While he began his lecture, she buried her face in her notebook, scribbling without daring to look at him. She wrote a question. "Did you come back to Korea for good?" Then slid the notebook toward him. He glanced at the page, a little surprised, then picked up a pen and started writing back. His answer was vague. Eun-so thought he was teasing her, but he kept writing. He asked if she had missed him. Just reading those words made her shiver, her breath catching in her throat. Slowly, she wrote back, "No." The period at the end made it sting even more. They didn't exchange a single glance for the rest of the lecture. When it finally ended, Si-hwa spoke up. He asked if she was leaving now or if she had another class or practice. She said she was free. He smiled, saying in that case they could walk together and finally talk about everything. Stepping outside, Si-hwa tried to count the years they hadn't seen each other. 6 years. It had been that long. Eun-so felt hurt that he couldn't even remember something so simple yet so important to her. Suddenly, he stopped. Leaning closer, he asked why she was being so cold from the very start. Was she really not happy to see her childhood friend again? His gaze pressed down on her, making her nervous. She couldn't say a word. Her eyes were on the verge of tears, but she forced herself to hold them back. She didn't want to remember all those hard days and lonely years she had spent missing him. She turned her back on him, trying to avoid his questions. His arrogance was irritating her. She started to walk away, but he stopped her, saying she was being way too harsh. He added that after so many years apart, she wasn't even happy to see him. She wouldn't even listen to him. Eun-so replied that she already answered, but he insisted that what she said and what she really felt were different. Pausing, he asked straight out, did she like him? Or was it true that she never missed him at all? She grew angry that he would bring up that awful birthday memory. Again. She turned to leave once more. Eun-so said she was going, but Si-hwa didn't budge. He told her he wasn't leaving. She froze. Then, slowly, carefully pronouncing every word, he said he had missed her terribly. Her heart pounded, her body trembled. She had no idea what those words could mean anymore. Suddenly, footsteps approached, and a blonde girl threw her arms around Si-hwa from behind. Completely unexpected. Before Eun-so could even process it, she saw them kissing. Just like that, she was the third wheel. Holding him tightly, the blonde said she had missed him so much that he couldn't imagine how long she'd been waiting. Noticing Eun-so, the girl asked who she was. Si-hwa answered casually that she was just a friend. Then the blonde leaned close and whispered to him that Eun-so wasn't even his type, nor anything like his exes. Finally, she invited him to have dinner with her, if he had no other plans for the evening. Hearing that, Eun-so said she was leaving, but Si-hwa caught her hand, asking her to wait. He wanted to talk. Turning back to the blonde, he said he already had plans tonight, and told her to let her brother know he'd call soon. Walking away with Eun-so, she asked what exactly he wanted to talk about alone. He only looked at her in silence. She thought to herself that once again he was just using her to dodge an awkward situation. Like always. He always found an excuse whenever it was convenient. And just as she expected, that's what was happening now. She asked him straight out if he had used her as an excuse again, adding that he hadn't changed at all. Grabbing her shoulders, Si-hwa pulled her close, preventing her from bumping into a passerby. Then he asked if she'd buy him dinner, because he was hungry. The question left her stunned. He repeated it, saying she should feed her handsome Hubei, her junior. That made her mad. She snapped, asking why he was calling her his sunbae, and told him to feed himself. He asked if she really didn't like it when he called her that. There was disappointment in his voice. After all, this was their first meeting in so many years, and she didn't even want to have dinner with him. Eun-so grew anxious. Taking Eun-so's hand into his palms, he added that he had no friends. Only her. His one and only. The guy asked her if she really wanted to leave. Unable to hold back, Eun-so admitted she was hungry too. Delighted, Kang Si-hwa said he wanted homemade food. That's why they went to his parents' place. Already standing at the entrance, Eun-so tried to convince him to eat at a restaurant instead. She even offered to pay for whatever he chose for lunch. But Si-hwa said that lately, that's all he'd been eating. He really missed home-cooked meals. He was about to agree to her idea, but Eun-so pointed out that the door had already been opened and they had to go in. Entering the girl's apartment, Si-hwa asked where her mom was. She replied that she was at work. Opening the fridge, Eun-so worried whether there was any food prepared, but remembered she was on a diet. It turned out there was no cooked food, only instant noodles, rice, and a few diet yogurts. She was startled by Si-hwa suddenly appearing behind her. He had to lower his head to meet her eyes. Trying to stay firm, the girl asked what he wanted to eat, since there was no real food at home. She began listing what was in the fridge, but then noticed he was standing way too close. The guy spoke to her and then went quiet for a moment, moving even closer. Her heart was racing. But all Si-hwa did was take out instant noodles and ask if he could eat them before leaving. A little later, he was sitting at the kitchen table while the girl watched TV. But Eun-so's attention was drawn to how he sighed heavily right after swallowing the noodles. She walked up to him, set a glass of water on the table, and said he hadn't changed in that way. Si-hwa had never eaten anything spicy, but he still believed he could handle those instant noodles. Thanking her, he immediately began gulping water to cool the burning in his mouth. He stared intently at Lee Eun-so. Suddenly, he pointed out that she was staring at him too closely. She blushed. But he told her if she wanted to ask something, she could go ahead. He didn't mind. Eun-so hesitated, wondering if she might make things worse by asking all the questions she had about him. But hearing this, Si-hwa reassured her she could ask anything without worrying. She was still unsure. She was shocked that he actually wanted to tell her something. But curiosity won over her nervousness, so she decided to ask about his life. She asked if he had returned to Korea for good and if not, when exactly he was leaving. But that wasn't all. He said it was funny. She looked visibly relieved, and she kept asking questions. Si-hwa began answering, telling her he had come back to Korea 3 months ago. She was upset that he had been in Korea for over 3 months and hadn't even contacted her. She wanted to ask him about it, but the guy's phone rang. He picked up and started talking. From his conversation, it was clear it was the girl they had run into by the university. Eun-so wanted to ask him about that girl, but didn't have the courage. When the guy said the call was over, Eun-so asked if it had been his girlfriend. She hadn't expected that from herself. The question just slipped out. By the time she realized, it was too late. Eun-so immediately began trying to excuse her question, but Si-hwa firmly and clearly said no. He explained that she was just younger, not his girlfriend. That answer shocked Eun-so. It showed on her face. She quickly tried to figure out how that could be, since they had kissed right in front of her, back at the university. The guy didn't give a clear answer, which only troubled her more. After all, they had broken up. Before, it had seemed like he didn't even like that girl, so Eun-so had felt at ease. But now, everything was different. It became obvious he was playing a double game. If only his mom knew how he'd been acting lately. Actress Ji Ham had always done charity work aimed at helping the lower classes. Even now, Eun-so lived thanks to many people, so she always wanted to share the love she had received. She told him that even when earning well, donating wasn't that easy. She added that whenever she saw Aunt Hwarin, she thought of that actress, because she also donated a lot. Suddenly, the girl noticed his expression change. It was like he was angry at her. Eun-so tried to figure out what was wrong, but he grabbed his phone and said he had to go. Her head filled with questions. Had she done something wrong? She stopped him, grabbing his hand. Si-hwa turned around and she asked why he was angry, if she had said something wrong. She wanted to add more, but he interrupted, saying he wasn't angry at her. Things only got more confusing. Eun-so tried to figure out who exactly he was angry at. But the guy had other plans. He just said he'd call her later and walked right out of the apartment. The next morning, Eun-so felt exhausted. She hadn't slept all night, lost in thoughts about her childhood friend. Her phone buzzed, and she instantly thought it was Si-hwa texting her. She jumped out of bed. But it turned out to be just some promotional message. That calmed her down, but also left her disappointed. She laid back down, going over the things he'd said yesterday, trying to make sense of it all. Meanwhile, an assistant entered the classroom, asking if Si-hwa was around since he wasn't answering his phone. The student said he wasn't there. The woman hoped he wasn't sick. Before leaving, she asked them to tell him to stop by the dean's office. Everyone started whispering. It was weird for someone to be called in over skipping just one class. One guy suggested maybe Si-hwa had some kind of special connection with the assistant, which sounded odd. The guys got into a dirty conversation about it until one girl told them to shut up. Later, during training, Eun-so's thoughts went back to him. He still hadn't texted her since yesterday. Suddenly, someone next to her asked if she wanted to join a rantrain club, which startled her badly. She was so scared by the unexpected question that the girl apologized right away. The run had already started, but the girls kept chatting about some school meeting. Eventually, Eun-so asked what exactly that rant club was. Haring has already signed up for 4 additional clubs. The Gills classmate explained that it was a random training club she had started herself. Haring explained it in more detail, begging Eun-so to join their next meetup. Eun-so asked who else was already in the club. The girl proudly said she was the very first member. Then, with sparkling eyes, Haring asked if her classmate would join too. But Eun-so flatly replied she wouldn't and quickly ran ahead, leaving the girl behind. Throughout the entire training, Haring kept pestering her, asking again and again if she'd join. They were never very close anyway. Haring always beat Eun-so in track and field. Under constant pressure, Eun-so finally gave in and agreed to join the random training club. After practice, Haring said they needed to make a group chat. The girl didn't get why. She asked what for, since it was only the 2 of them, but her classmate was sure that would soon change. Going down the stairs, they ran into another girl, and Haring started pitching the club again. At that moment, Eun-so got a new message. She thought it was finally from Si-hwa, but once again, it was just some stupid ad. Why did she keep hoping it would be from him? Suddenly, Harang's shout snapped her out of it. She had forgotten her net and rushed off. Soon class was over. On her way home, Eun-so wondered what she should eat for dinner. She had planned to invite Harang along, but that didn't work out. So she decided. But suddenly, her attention was drawn to a noisy crowd gathering at the basketball court. At the center of it all was Kang Si-hwa. Eun-so couldn't believe he was actually playing here, right by her campus. It felt like a dream. He never played sports. The whole thing looked like a scene straight out of a drama. Not surprising, though. He always ended up being the main character wherever he went. Eun-so kept watching him. Suddenly, he turned, spotted her, and called out, which instantly made her feel uncomfortable. He wanted to ask her something, but she shouted at him not to step onto the court during the game. It slipped out by accident, putting her in an awkward spot. He looked a little surprised. But then he turned back and told her to wait for him so they could go grab dinner together. Eun-so felt so embarrassed. She always ended up looking pathetic in front of him. Her face turned red. Moments later, Si-hwa was standing next to her, asking what kind of bold sports spirit that was. But she quickly cut him off by shoving his bag into his hands. He thanked her in return. Then she dared to ask what he was even doing there at the sports department. Looking straight into her eyes, he gently said he was waiting for her, since he didn't have her number. She wanted to say something back, but he immediately started asking about their dinner plans. She began to answer, but then heard someone calling out to them. Eun-so turned around. Realizing the voice was calling for him, she decided to step away, already tired of the attention he got. But just as she turned, a strong male hand suddenly landed on her shoulder, pulling her back. It was her childhood friend. With one arm pulling her close, he asked what she wanted for dinner. At first, Eun-so didn't understand what was happening, but then it hit her. He was using her as cover again. As they walked away from the girls who'd tried to talk with the guy, she overheard one of them whisper that she must be his girlfriend. Later, at a small diner, she asked him about his life during the 6 years he'd been gone. He said people had treated him kindly, then went quiet. An awkward silence hung between them. Si-hwa slid her a small plate of meat. The sight was strangely familiar. It made her remember that awful birthday, the one that left nothing but bad memories. He acted like his old self, but this version of Kang Si-hwa was completely different, almost unrecognizable. She couldn't put her finger on what was off, but something about him felt strange. Too strange for her childhood friend. It was the first time she'd ever seen him openly angry. Hard to describe, but she knew it wasn't the same him. Sure, people change in a few years, but this uncertainty was eating away at her more and more. The girl casually commented on the TV news about Ji Ham, even comparing the 2 of them. Then she asked about his mom, curious if she knew he was back in town. She added that their mothers had actually started talking a lot lately. That caught him off guard. He asked again, confused. Eun-so was shocked he didn't know anything about his own mom. She explained they'd been in touch for a while. Then it hit her. Maybe he wasn't even speaking to his family at all. When he first left, his mother hadn't even known. She only found out about his studies abroad much later. The questions felt pointless, but she still worked up the courage to ask. Smiling, she gently asked if he'd stayed in touch with his family at all during those years abroad. At her words, pain flickered across his eyes, his face instantly shifting. She regretted asking right away. She rushed to ask if he was okay, if his mom was okay. He insisted everything was fine. He reached for his soju glass while she kept pressing for the truth. Suddenly, a loud crash, the sound of a glass hitting the floor. It wasn't the one with soju. Jumping up, Eun-so panicked, asking if the guy was hurt, if he'd spilled anything. With his head down, Si-hwa muttered he was fine, that it was just a glass of plain water. The girled face filled with worry. She quickly called a waiter to replace it. Calmly, he told her to just swap it out and handed her the glass. When she stepped away, his head dropped again. Pain spread across his face. Eun-so realized something terrible must have happened, but he had no intention of telling her. Why though? Why make that face like he wanted her to guess on her own? And whenever she asked, he dodged the question. His mood shifted so unpredictably. Still, she hoped their friendship hadn't changed, even after all his years away. But maybe that hope was only hers. When he ignored her text, she'd thought something was wrong. Yet the real question, why he suddenly showed up in front of her, remained only in her mind. When it was time to part, they said goodbye. That's when she realized. She still didn't even have his number. Just then, he turned back and held out his hand. She thought he just wanted a handshake. But Si-hwa told her to hand over her phone. She instantly pulled her hand back, her face turning bright red. As he typed his number into her phone, she scrambled for excuses for her flushed cheeks. Then she noticed his number was already saved in her contacts, but under the label, "Do not contact." That stung him, though he tried not to show it. Instead, he just changed it back to his name. He dialed his own number, then handed her phone back, telling her to answer it right now. Holding the phone to her ear, Eun-so heard his voice. Somehow, it still surprised her. Standing across from her, he told her she could call him anytime she wanted. Back home, she opened their new chat, debating whether to text him. That's when she realized it was the exact same number as before. He'd never changed it. Then why had he ignored her all this time? She'd worried something had happened to him. But the truth that he'd simply been ignoring her made her even more frustrated. Entering the chat, she saw his latest message. "Good night." Just sent. Meanwhile, Kang Si-hwa stood before a family portrait. His mom, his dad, and himself. Suddenly, footsteps behind him. A soft, feminine voice asked if it was really him who'd come home. It was his mom. She said that after he left, she and his dad worried about him a lot. Taking his arm, she asked why he never answered their calls, but there was only silence. She added that she understood it must have been hard for him too, but maybe it was time to stop acting this way. Hearing that, Si-hwa immediately pulled away from her. She begged him not to pretend like they were strangers. Turning to his mother, his voice cold and his eyes empty, he told her that he still wanted to kill her. The woman replied that he should have accepted it a long time ago. What would his behavior even change? He didn't say a word, just slammed the door and left, leaving her behind. She thought to herself that there was truly nothing good left in him. How could he be so much like his mother? Sitting alone, Si-hwa remembered those awful moments from the past when they convinced him everything was his fault. The words, "You're to blame for Hwarang's death," brought tears to his eyes. What did he do wrong? Meanwhile, Eun-so watched as Haerang raised a glass of soju, cheering up the whole group. They were sitting separately. She stared at her phone, but then overheard the girls chatting nearby. They were talking about the new guy who had just transferred to their department. They couldn't stop gushing over him. They wondered if he had a girlfriend, but Eun-so wasn't interested. She just kept listening quietly. Suddenly, a girl sat down across from her and asked if she remembered the guy who came by before. She added that he was tall and handsome, standing by the basketball hoop. Eun-so asked again, pretending not to get it. She tried to act clueless. There was no reason to draw attention to herself. But Haerang suddenly appeared at her side and chimed in, saying she saw them talking near the field. A flood of questions came at Eun-so all at once. It annoyed her, dragging her back to memories of school days. And then, out of nowhere, came the most unexpected question. Was she in love with him? Eun-so quickly denied it, but accidentally slipped, admitting they were friends. She explained they'd known each other since childhood, so they were close, but not a couple. Someone cut her off, shoving their phone forward, asking her to give them his number. The girl froze. Looking down, she apologized and said he wouldn't be too happy if she gave it out. A little later, Eun-so was standing outside, still staring at her phone. Scrolling through Si-hwa's messages from last night, she wondered, Why was she still waiting for him to text? She was about to leave when she heard voices around the corner. The tone wasn't friendly. Peeking past the wall, she saw two guys picking on another student. She didn't know who he was, but it was obvious the older students were harassing him. What should she do? Curiosity tugged at her. Who was this guy? Suddenly, their eyes met. Her heart skipped. Eun-so realized it was about to turn into a fight. She decided to go get help. In such a harsh world, you couldn't even walk peacefully. Everyone just pretended not to see. Just as she was about to step in, a loud thud rang out. The bully had been knocked down. The guy they were bothering stepped out from behind the corner. He looked oddly familiar to Eun-so. She wanted to ask him something. But the moment she spoke the first syllable, he disappeared, running right past her. Hanen had seen everything. She rushed over, bombarding her friend with questions. She asked if that guy hurt her. Eun-so reassured her. She was fine. Nothing happened. Later that night, the girl was climbing up to the 8th floor of her building. She was exhausted. She couldn't understand how Hanen always had so much energy. All she wanted was a shower and sleep. But unexpectedly, sitting in her hallway was Si-hwa. He asked why she came home so late. A while later, Eun-so tried calling her mom, but all she got was voicemail. Meanwhile, Si-hwa walked to one of the doors, about to open it, but she stopped him. Blocking it with her body, the girl told him that was her room. He asked where his room was then. She was shocked. She told him there was no way his room could be in her house. Then, with a smirk, Si-hwa asked if her mom hadn't told her that he'd be living with them from now on. Eun-so was completely stunned, but the guy didn't stop. He kept trying to find his room. He opened another door. She rushed to stop him, saying it was her gym. Peeking over his shoulder, she realized all her workout gear was gone. He was already taking off his jacket. That's when she asked if he was really going to live here, with her family. Eun-so couldn't wrap her head around why her own mom hadn't told her about something like this. She was her daughter, after all. She used to get embarrassed by situations like this, especially when her mom said that from now on she'd be going to school together with Si-hwa. What surprised her even more was that it wasn't her mom who told her directly. Her mom texted him instead. Same with that whole take piano lessons from Aunt Wara with Si-hwa thing. She already started suspecting her mom might be the one pulling the strings, since she was totally capable of doing anything, and this wasn't the first time. That's when Si-hwa told her he left his home earlier that day. But even after hearing it, she still couldn't believe what was actually happening to her. A few minutes into their talk, he casually asked how long she planned on staying here, because he needed to take a shower. Hearing that, Eun-so instantly turned red and denied she'd be here for long. Then she quickly slammed the bathroom door shut, while he just smirked and laughed. She knew she'd walked right into his little trap again, but once he came out, she had to ask him seriously about all this. Pouring herself a glass of water to calm down, she kept wondering, what was her mom even thinking, letting him live with them? They were already adults now. A little later, Si-hwa came out of the shower in a black bathrobe, hair wet, water dripping down his body. Eun-so never expected he'd already brought his own stuff over, even a robe for showering. Trying to stay calm, she looked away and told him to get dressed and come talk in her room. They needed to discuss things. Suddenly, he leaned down and asked what she wanted to talk about. His body was right in front of her eyes, and it made her nervous. She shoved him away, cheeks burning red, and told him again to go get dressed first. He was a bit surprised. She pushed him harder than he expected, and it even hurt a little. So he decided not to push it and actually went to change into normal clothes. Meanwhile, she was texting her mom, asking where she was. A few minutes later, he came back in simple white loungewear and asked what she wanted to talk about. She told him to sit down. Thinking about living together, she grabbed a notebook and pen. They needed rules. Otherwise, they'd just keep getting in each other's way. He actually looked relieved. Honestly, he thought she'd kick him out the moment he walked back in dressed. She didn't know what to say. He told her he left home and it felt like there was something heavy behind it. But was he telling the truth? What could have happened in his life that he couldn't even tell her about? He almost looked half asleep, but told her to start writing down her rules. Rule 1, stay clothed, no bathrobes. Rule 2, don't enter each other's rooms without permission. Rule 3, at school, pretend they don't know each other. She added she'd come up with more rules later if needed. At that point, he reached for the pen, saying he had a rule too. He started writing, while Eun-so curiously watched. His rule said once a day they had to do something together. It caught her off guard. But he explained, nothing special, just like eating together. He added that eating alone felt too lonely. especially since he didn't really have friends. He couldn't even speak Korean properly. After thinking, she refused. She said he had plenty of other friends to eat with. His face immediately fell. Seeing his expression, she thought maybe she was too harsh and might have hurt him. Then he said if she wouldn't accept his rule, he wouldn't follow hers either. He started pulling his shirt off. She yelled at him, furious, asking if he'd lost his mind and why he was stripping. Covering her face with a sheet of paper so she wouldn't see him, she shouted she'd tell her mom how he was behaving. Si-hwa stepped closer and told her to just try telling. Did she really think her mother would take her side? Eun-so still believed, no matter how much her mom loved other people, she was still her daughter, and she'd take her side. A few seconds later, she gave in and screamed, "Fine, she got it. Just put his shirt back on." She'd agree to his rule, as long as there was nothing weird about it. He put his shirt back on and asked what she meant by weird. She kept blushing. She really was embarrassed by how built his body was. She said she just didn't want him to demand something inconvenient or difficult. He laughed and told her not to worry. Why would he make her life harder? Looked like they'd settled their rules for living together, and that was that. But suddenly, the girl's phone rang. It was her mom. Answering, she noticed Si-hwa was looking at her with a soft smile. She decided to step into another room to talk. The guy looked a little surprised, but didn't say anything. Nervously, she told her mom that Kang Si-hwa showed up and said he'd be living with them, because she'd allowed it. Her mom confirmed it. She said he was going through a hard time, and they had to help him. But Eun-so couldn't understand. Why didn't her mom tell her first? They were adults. It wasn't easy to live together like this. She was angry at her mom, until suddenly her mom revealed Hwarin had died. Hearing that, Eun-so froze in shock. Now, realizing what he had been through, she started seeing things differently. She thought it over and decided she couldn't leave Si-hwa alone. Not when he was like this. And now, even if it was a little late, she knew she had to take care of him. She'd always known her mom paid special attention to Aunt Hwarin and to Kang Si-hwa. But she never understood why. Thoughts like that often came to her, sometimes even hurt her. But right now, that wasn't what mattered. After the call, she walked back into the room, apologizing for taking so long. She asked what he was doing. He calmly answered he was watching a movie he hadn't finished last time. Curious, she asked what kind of movie it was, and if he even liked it. Then she added she wanted to watch it with him too. They sat there in silence watching, but her mind kept circling back to one thing. Hwarin was gone. She also remembered the moment when he warned her not to tell her mom, as if her aunt would ever take her side. Halfway through the film, he suddenly asked her, if you could go back to any time period, like in this movie, where would you want to end up? The question caught her off guard. He explained the movie's hero got to live in the past he always dreamed of. He was simply curious. What moment would she want to relive? With some nervousness, she admitted she didn't really have such a moment. Deep inside, she knew now wasn't the time for confessions. Instead, she asked him, did he have a memory he'd want to go back to? After a pause, he said no, because what would even change if he did? Besides, he added, the present always feels unsatisfying. That's just life. She noticed how calm he sounded, but inside she could feel it wasn't the whole truth. Suddenly craving ice cream, she told him she'd go grab some, and bring one back for him too. But stepping outside, her chest felt tight, heavy. To her surprise, the guy came along to the store. He grabbed way too much ice cream, but explained. She usually ate 2 or 3 in one sitting. Then he teased her, saying it wasn't just with ice cream. Hot dogs too. She got annoyed, insisting she wasn't like that anymore. After their little food talk, he asked if she was really okay walking barefoot in flip-flops. It was chilly outside. But she couldn't shake the thought of Hwarin's death. She knew she couldn't leave Si-hwa alone like this. Since he hadn't told her himself, she had to act as if she didn't know, at least until he was ready. She didn't want to ask first, but she also didn't know what else to do. Suddenly, she just stopped walking. He noticed immediately. Why did she freeze like that? It was too much. She felt herself breaking, ready to cry. She whispered an apology for her state. He suggested they sit down for a while. He had something he needed to tell her. They sat on a bench, ice cream in hand, ready to talk. When he finally said he had something to share, she thought he meant Aunt Hwarin. She panicked inside. What could she say to comfort him? What could she do? But instead, he suddenly said, "You're staring at me." He explained she often looked at him like that. He usually pretended not to notice, but tonight her gaze was so intense he couldn't ignore it anymore. Right after that, he asked, "Have you heard about my mom?" She answered sadly that she had, apologizing for never saying anything. Still eating his ice cream, he told her there was nothing for her to apologize for. It was fine. She knew she shouldn't push, shouldn't ask if he was okay. But her heart sank. No matter what words she tried to find, none of them could comfort him. There was simply nothing she could say. He leaned in a little, ready to share something of his own. She felt awkward, uneasy. Then he told her his dad had another woman. Shocked, she asked him to repeat that. He said he had found out long ago. Once he'd even gotten a message from an unknown number. Just a single photo. In it, there was a man and a woman. He didn't know if it was his parents together or two strangers. He was shaken back then. She asked if that was why he suddenly changed and if it was because of that strange message. But he had just brushed it off, saying nothing was wrong. Ever since that day, though, the photo haunted him. Should he tell his mom? Or keep silent? In the end, he never told her. He used to believe he had the perfect family. And he was terrified that his words could destroy it all. But that wasn't the only problem. She wondered where this was going. He continued. At the time, he thought silence would fix everything, that things would go back to normal. But they didn't. Instead, he felt guilty. Guilty that it was his fault. That his mom had died. Because of him. After she passed, he spent a long time alone. He had nowhere to go. No energy to move. And honestly, no choice either. A piece of ice cream slipped to the ground. The guide lost his appetite mid-story. Later, he returned to Korea, even though he never really wanted to. His dad sent him a letter, asking them to become a family again. Not like before, but sincerely hoping they could live together, smiling once more. That made him cry. And so, due to circumstances in his life, he returned to Korea. The woman his dad had been involved with was still around. And of course, that made him feel uncomfortable. He thought he wouldn't remember her face, yet the moment he saw her, he recognized her instantly. It surprised him. Later, this woman started behaving as if she were replacing his real mother. In the house where they'd lived with his mom and dad, she acted as though she understood everything. Like his mother, but he couldn't stand that she had simply taken his mother's place. That was the reason he decided to leave home. He couldn't even breathe in the same space with her. The girl noticed a difference in how Si-hwa looked compared to the person she had always known. He used to shine brightly, just like his beautiful name. He always smiled and looked confident. In any crowd, he stood out. People always praised and congratulated him. Others constantly talked about him and envied him, as if he had no weaknesses or problems. Some said he was special, always spoiled. He was the kind of guy with overflowing talent and opportunities, capable of getting anything he wanted. Yet suddenly, everything turned upside down, and he became nothing like his past self. Still, he decided to take a card with money with him. He explained that he had actually wanted to leave everything behind, but it was too hard to just walk away. That woman probably just wanted him to accept the situation, or quietly disappear. But he didn't want to give up so easily, even though in the end he still lived off his father. And thinking this, he also considered himself trash. The girl thought Si-hwa had his own circumstances and hoped that if she understood what had happened, she could grasp what he was trying to show her. She just wanted him to tell her everything, what was going on with him. More precisely, she thought she could make herself understand him, and through that, solve all their problems. Now, Eun-so realized how selfish that thinking was. From his short stories and words, she couldn't see the whole picture. Still, she just wanted to be on his side, so she hugged him. Holding him, she tried to explain it was normal for parents to act like that, and he shouldn't feel like a parasite. She suggested he think of it as revenge, spending the money without guilt. After all, his dad had plenty of it. She continued hugging him, saying it wasn't his fault, he was not to blame. He was surprised she wanted to support him this way. He asked, "Do I really have to spend all the money on this card for my dad?" Eun-so suggested he buy anything he wanted, and also requested he throw away that weird robe. It looked terrible. He laughed in surprise. After all, it was a designer robe. She was surprised that the brand even made robes, and laughed, saying it wasn't surprising it looked so luxurious. Suddenly, he touched her hand resting on his shoulder, saying she was talking nonsense, and asked if she was really trying to comfort him. She panicked, blushing, and insisted she was serious, not joking. The guy held her wrist, leaned very close to her face, and asked if she truly meant what she said. She realized the situation was escalating. They were far too close. They looked into each other's eyes, an awkward pause stretching between them. Si-hwa's lips were so close that she could feel his breath. His eyes were fixed on her. The next moment, he kissed her gently. Eun-so couldn't believe she was kissing him, but suddenly he placed a hand on her shoulder. They continued to gaze at each other, both aware of what might happen. He stepped back, saying he had made a mistake and shouldn't have done that. Eun-so was stunned, unable to understand what had just happened, and he calmly suggested moving on. And a moment later, he wished her good night. Once in bed, the girl couldn't sleep, thinking about the evening. Kang Si-hwa too was in shock, unable to comprehend it. He remembered school, a punishment where he had to run in circles. The guy didn't argue, accepting it calmly, as he had never run before and now it was a special treatment. But then he suddenly heard a girl shouting at him. Eun-so asked if it hurt him to do the punishment. He was surprised, pointing at himself. "You mean me?" She didn't understand why he stayed silent hearing that. If he had said a word, everyone would have quieted down. Yet he decided to respond that he simply wouldn't pay it any attention. And he added that there was no point in getting angry. But she didn't like that. So the girl got angry, since she was on his side, not anyone else's. And she repeated that very phrase to him again today. The guy laughed at home, thinking she was a little silly. After all, she hadn't changed at all, and he realized that Eun-so truly still loved him. All this happened during the final gardening exam, where they only needed to submit a diary and photos, but it seemed she was starting to fall asleep. She tried to resist sleep so as not to nod off during the exam. That semester, they studied first aid and resuscitation through theory and practice. She still couldn't tell if it was reality or some dream. Suddenly, she shouted that he had gone crazy. Looking around, she realized her shout had startled the people nearby, as she was in a flower shop among others. She got flustered, unable to choose flowers because they were all so beautiful. She didn't know what to pick, maybe something easy to grow. She noticed a begonia, which was cheap. She was told it was unpretentious and affordable and would bloom in just a week. Eun-so was delighted and immediately chose the flower, deciding to buy it. But the sellers added an interesting fact. In the language of flowers, this plant symbolized unrequited love, so schoolgirls often bought it. They suggested placing it on the counter, and when her friend also picked a flower, they could pay together. But she got annoyed, saying she'd still think about other options. Walking around the shop, the girl noticed another flower. When she asked about it, she was told it was hard to care for and unsuitable for the assignment. She didn't know whether to choose the easy-to-care-for flower, symbolizing unrequited love, or the one that was very demanding. She decided to first pick a pot for the flower, then choose the plant, to make the choice easier. While inspecting the shop, she saw that guy behind the glass. Today, he looked very cute and stylishly dressed. Realizing it was Kang Si-hwa, she got scared and decided to hide so he wouldn't see her. He, along with other guys, entered the same shop, and their group noticed the sunflowers. She was frightened that he was there too, but didn't understand why he was there. She overheard their conversation about which flowers he liked. He said his mom grew many, so he knew a bit about them. Eun-so didn't understand him, as he really seemed indifferent. She started to get angry at him right in the flower shop, with people around. However, realizing her mistake, she quickly calmed down and stopped being angry. Smiling, the girl grabbed a random pot without even looking inside. The seller noted that she seemed to like cute flowers, but she didn't really understand what that meant. She saw it was just a pot with soil and a single pea with a mouth inside. Yet she decided to take it for the assignment. Although the flower was said to symbolize unrequited love, she touched it with her finger. But she didn't see it as unrequited love, she just noticed it, thinking, isn't it strange not to notice after all this? She remembered the seller saying to water it when the outer leaves start to shrivel. If she followed the instructions, it wouldn't be difficult. Looking at the plant again, Eun-so was a little surprised. Did it always look like this? She remembered to immediately add a photo to the gardener's diary and photographed the pot. Suddenly, she noticed a message sent to her, showing a photo of a group of people gathered around a table. She was invited, as it was a first-year student meeting, and they sat together. She was surprised, but she decided not to go and replied that she would come next time. The girl headed somewhere. She needed to exit at Kanbyeon Station. She seemed to fall asleep in the subway, but woke up when she heard the doors were about to close. She ran to the exit, realizing she might have left her phone on the table. A guy in glasses picked it up, but then heard her calling him to return her phone. The doors were closing, and there was no time to argue. She managed to grab her phone and was happy. The guy was surprised. It was funny, and the moment was worth filming. He heard that someone had filmed it, and it was cool and amusing. But looking at the seat, he noticed the same phone. Seeing the wallpaper, he realized it wasn't his phone at all. A few seconds later, he realized that the girl had forgotten her phone and he, not paying attention, had accidentally given her his own. The girl hadn't realized it yet, and she was in a good mood, even though she had almost missed her subway stop and nearly forgotten her phone, unaware of anything. Eun-so went to the gym, since physical exercise was always the best cure for a headache, and extra thoughts quickly disappeared. After the gym, she decided to take a shower and do some stretching. While taking a bath, she realized that it would be better to use a large bathtub since it was more spacious. Here it wasn't very convenient. She wondered how Si-hwa fit in this tub, given his taller height, but decided not to think too much about him. In the hot bath, after good physical activity, she started feeling sleepy. Suddenly, her thoughts began to wander into fantasies or dreams where Si-hwa unexpectedly entered her bathroom while she was bathing. Realizing her thoughts, she immediately opened her eyes and blushed. Eun-so got angry at herself for thinking about him again. Had she gone crazy? And all this was because of the previous situation when they almost kissed. But she tried not to dwell on it, to avoid overthinking. She decided she should distract herself and do stretching, as only exercise saved her from extra thoughts. As she was about to leave the bathroom, she heard strange noises. It seemed that Kang Si-hwa had already returned home, and she panicked. The girl blushed deeply, suddenly realizing she had forgotten to bring her clothes into the bathroom. She didn't know what to do and panicked, searching for her phone. She was glad she had taken it with her, but when she tried to turn it on, it was off. Eun-so started thinking about what to do. One option was to quickly run back to her room while Si-hwa was in his. But she realized that if she did that, an unexpected situation could happen. For example, he might hear her and come out of his room asking what she was doing. She got angry and decided not to do that. She also didn't want to just wait in the bathroom in case he wanted to go to the toilet. Eun-so started panicking again, unable to figure out what to do. She decided to slightly open the door first, to assess the situation. She looked around and decided to call his name to see if he was there. Then the girl remembered that he might decide to play a joke and hide. After all, as a child, he often did that and scared her. But at the same time, she understood they were adults now, and such jokes would be crazy. She mustered courage and shouted loudly, asking why he wasn't answering when he was at home. But after that, she heard no response. She repeated that she knew he was home and told him to stop pretending. A few seconds later, she decided to check all the rooms and realized he really wasn't home. Eun-so got angry, realizing she had panicked for nothing, thinking he might be home. She calmly left the room, got dressed, and went to eat. While eating, the girl saw a notification on her phone. Si-hwa had asked her to eat without him today. She felt embarrassed as she had already eaten, and it seemed he only invited her to eat together when it suited him. Suddenly, she wondered if he even knew the entry code for the door. So she decided to send it to him just in case. The girl started to worry a little, wondering if something had happened to him. But after a few minutes, she put her phone aside and lay down in bed. The next day, the guy who had mixed up his phone met his friend, who asked if the person had returned his phone yet, since it wasn't normal to react so calmly. She suggested he go to the police and in the meantime just buy a new phone. But the guy said the phone was simply turned off, not that anyone was ignoring him. During their conversation, Si-hwa approached and asked why Yuna was scolding the guy again. The girl immediately explained that Yuan's phone had been stolen, so he should find the person and go to the police. He supported the idea, thinking it was best to buy a new phone since no one contacted him, and instead they were texting Yuna. She asked if he still had classes since hers had finished in the morning, though it had been boring. Si-hwa asked what classes she had. Yuna replied that it was college English, and since he had no classes after lunch, she suggested he go for a walk. She wanted to visit a new cafe with him, and the guy asked where it was. At that moment, Eun-so was passing by with her friend, and she noticed him and paid attention. Looking over, she saw some girl holding his hand. She said he was alive and well, and everything was fine with him. And she added that there was no need to worry for nothing, since nothing had happened to him. Haerang thought that he would at least greet her, but the girl replied that he had been there with a friend. Suddenly, she asked if they had quarreled. The girl clenched a can of Coke in anger. It seemed that this question stirred some emotions in her, and nervously replied that there had been no quarrel at all. Eun-so checked her phone and saw a chat where classmates were asking who would drink today and told her about it. Another girl added that she should write that she would come too. In the chat, classmates began to worry about Haerang since she stopped replying to messages and asked her to check her phone. After some time, Si-hwa was already at that cafe, which had a very fun atmosphere. He watched the people and listened to their conversations. One of the guys was not allowed into the hall to work since the visitors would be scared to place an order. Their eyes met. To Si-hwa, this guy in black clothing seemed somewhat cold-blooded. Moments later, his friend arrived at the cafe where they were supposed to meet. At the same time, Eun-so was relaxing with her classmates, complaining about how someone was irritating her. Today, she was the center of attention. She decided to be the one who drinks for everyone. She was advised not to drink too much, as it wasn't the best idea. She downed a whole mug in one go, thinking it was beer in the glass, but it turned out to be something stronger. Her friend Haerang felt a little embarrassed for her and regretted not stopping her. But Eun-so felt simply wonderful and thought she was perfectly fine. After some time, they started to disperse, and Haerang said goodbye to some of the guys. Now came the most difficult task. She was left with her friend. She didn't know what to do with her since she was quite drunk. Haerang thought about taking the girl to her home, but she immediately dismissed that thought, thinking it was inappropriate. She tried to wake her up so she could at least tell her where she lived, since she had mentioned it before but now forgot. At that moment, Si-hwa approached from behind, noticed them, and asked what they were doing outside. Haerang was scared that it was him who approached them. The guy approached Eun-so and asked if she was okay. He asked if she could at least walk home on her own. When she looked up and saw him, she slightly insulted him by calling him a goat. It seemed even Haerang didn't expect to hear that, and Si-hwa even more so. Her friend explained that Eun-so had overdone it with alcohol, since she generally didn't handle it well. He reacted calmly, smiling, and said he understood everything. The guy tried to bring her back to her senses and suggested she come with him. Haerang found this suspicious and said it was fine, that she would take her home herself. He asked if she knew where the girl lived. The friend replied that she did, since she had been there before, but then remembered she forgot. The guy said that in that case, he would take her home himself. She was very surprised, not understanding why he wanted to take her. Si-hwa lifted the girl onto his back and told Haerang that she should have known they lived together. At this news, she was in complete shock but couldn't do anything. After a while, Eun-so regained consciousness and didn't understand what was happening, since she didn't feel the effort at all, but the ground under her feet was moving. She thought it was just another dream. The guy noticed she had woken up and asked if she really had. Realizing the situation, she was confused and blushed, since he was carrying her on his back home. But after a few seconds, she accepted it as it was actually comfortable to be near him. Eun-so asked what he had been doing yesterday, since he hadn't come home. But the guy didn't give a concrete answer, and the girl began to get angry. She was worried about him, yet he couldn't even answer her question. They were almost home, but the girl began asking him to let her go. She couldn't understand how he knew where she was. Eun-so began to get angry and blush, thinking she herself had called him and hoped she hadn't done anything wrong. She was upset that she always looked ridiculous in front of him. Suddenly, at some point, the girl began to lose her balance. She started shouting that she might fall right onto the asphalt. But closing her eyes and waiting a few seconds, she didn't understand what was happening. But the guy managed to catch her and repeated that she should be more careful. He noticed that she was walking in zigzags, so he made sure she didn't fall. At that moment, she wanted to ask him why he had kissed her then, but couldn't muster the courage. He gently held her by the waist, and she blushed, thinking about how to ask her question. In that moment, she realized he was still holding his hand on her waist and hadn't let go. Eun-so didn't know how to behave in this situation. Si-hwa noticed something was wrong. The girl was slightly trembling and quiet, and he thought she felt unwell. He didn't understand why she was so surprised over a simple joke. The guy turned her to face him so he could see her face and asked if she was crying. Looking at him, the girl asked him to let her go. Si-hwa thought about how she had gotten so scared by his simple joke. At that moment, she felt unwell. A few moments later, she looked at his shirt and noticed the logo of an expensive brand. She got angry and began to cry, though it wasn't clear why. The next day, Eun-so went with Haerang to a local coffee shop to enjoy some good coffee. Her friend turned to her and said she had decided to get a chocolate frappuccino. Just then, Si-hwa came up from behind, greeted her, and asked about Eun-so. She greeted him back, but when she looked around, she realized her friend had disappeared, even though she'd just been there a moment ago. The guy assumed she'd gone to the restroom, but the girl panicked and quickly grabbed her phone. She told him that Eun-so had just texted her, saying she was on her way over and asked him to go ahead and order his coffee first. She'd order once Eun-so showed up. Si-hwa studied the menu carefully, trying to decide what he wanted this time. Out of the blue, he asked the girl what she was going to drink. She got flustered and said she didn't need anything. But he insisted, so she ended up ordering a chocolate frappuccino. Meanwhile, Eun-so was actually hiding under a table, texting her friend Haerang to leave as quickly as possible. The guy ordered his coffee and calmly headed outside. But before leaving, he noticed that Eun-so had tried to hide from him. He didn't let on that he'd seen her, though. To her friend, the guy seemed really nice and sweet, especially since he treated her to coffee. She told Eun-so all about it while they sat at the table together, talking about him. But she thought it was strange that the girl didn't drink any coffee with her and just sat there looking nervous. She remembered that when he ordered coffee, he'd gotten 3 drinks but only took 1. She asked why he hadn't grabbed the other one. He told her to give it to Eun-so. At that exact moment, the girl was still hiding under the table and heard everything. She realized that he really had noticed her, which was why he'd gotten that extra coffee. The thought of how silly it must have looked from the outside made her feel embarrassed. Suddenly, her friend remembered that yesterday, Si-hwa had mentioned they lived together. So she asked if anything had happened the night before. Right then, her friend felt like she was watching a movie, waiting for some juicy twist and details about last night. But when she asked, Eun-so grabbed her head in frustration and admitted that she'd thrown up. The worst part? Right on his clothes. Hanen was shocked, staring with her eyes wide open. She tried to comfort her, saying it wasn't a big deal and clothes can be washed. But then she remembered his stuff was brand new and really expensive. Now she just hoped he wasn't angry, since it had been an accident. Still, it was strange to her that he acted like everything was fine. She'd never seen that before. It drove her crazy because she couldn't understand why he wasn't upset about it. Thinking it over, she glanced at her coffee and even wondered if he'd poisoned it, or maybe he'd bought it just to make her feel guilty. At the same time, she wasn't sure if she was overthinking it, and she didn't know how to act around him anymore. Hanen wanted to fix the situation, so she told her to just apologize instead of avoiding the problem. But the thought of bringing it up stressed her out. What if he asked her to pay for the damage? Still, her friend was sure everything would be fine, because he hadn't even gotten mad in the first place. Then her friend suddenly realized it wasn't her phone. Eun-so was shocked. Their phones had gotten mixed up, which meant she never even saw that message. Since they went to the same university, they agreed to meet and swap their phones back. Meanwhile, class had started. The professor told everyone to form groups of 2 to 4, and anyone left over had to submit a request by the day after tomorrow to be assigned randomly. Eun-so sat with Hanen, looking pretty bored and unsure who she wanted to team up with. They could hear classmates all around them forming groups, picking partners for the assignment. Eun-so asked if there was anyone her friend wanted to group up with. If not, they could just team up together. But Haren's face showed a flicker of nervousness. That's when Si-hwa walked up to their desk, placed his hand on the edge of it, and told her she'd be in a group with him. It sounded more like a statement than a suggestion. Eun-so froze and even felt a little scared. He had appeared so suddenly, and she hadn't noticed him at all even though she'd just looked around. Hearing his proposal to be in the same group, she started stuttering, unsure how to answer. She quickly came up with an excuse, saying she'd already agreed to be in a group with her friend. Hanen backed her up, adding that 3 people wouldn't work. When he heard they couldn't be 3, he said they should just find 1 more person. Eun-so was shocked. She had hoped he'd just drop it and stop trying. But he scanned the room and spotted someone who looked like a good fit for their group. It was Eun, a guy with light hair and glasses. The girls were surprised. They hadn't seen him before and had no idea who he was. Eun explained that after re-registration, some students had dropped out, which opened up a spot for him in the course. The guys started chatting about that, and then Si-hwa suggested they do the group project together. But Eun said he had another class coming up, so he had to run, and they said goodbye. Si-hwa looked pretty satisfied. He'd found someone for their group of 4, and asked if everything was good now. Eun-so decided to apologize for the fact that, because of her, they had to add 2 more people to their group. But when she glanced over, she noticed her friend staring at the guy with light hair, with that dreamy, in-love look. The second she saw him, her whole face lit up with excitement. She started firing off questions: who he was, how old he was, and whether he had a girlfriend. Standing next to her with Si-hwa, Eun-so watched as he replied that Eun probably didn't have a girlfriend right now. But then, thinking back, he said that maybe he did have one. As soon as Hanen heard that, she instantly looked disappointed. A second later, though, he added that they might have broken up. That made her happy again, but then he kept tossing out different answers, sending her mood swinging up and down. Eun-so realized what he was doing and asked him to stop teasing her friend. He didn't push it further. Instead, with a smile, he suggested they all head home together. She was surprised. It really did seem like he didn't care at all about what had happened between them the other night. But Eun-so decided to play hard to get and told him she had plans. He raised an eyebrow and asked what kind of plans she could possibly have right now. After a few seconds of thinking, she came up with an excuse: that she had club activities. She walked over to her friend and asked her to back her up, saying they had practiced together that evening. Si-hwa just stood to the side, watching her scramble for excuses, knowing full well that she hadn't wanted to go this morning but suddenly changed her mind. After thinking it over, he suddenly said he wanted to join too. Hearing that, Eun-so was completely shocked. She couldn't believe he was being serious. He hated sports. Did he really mean it? But then the guy said he liked playing basketball, and she should have seen that by now. Eun-so turned to Hae-rang to ask what she thought. Clearly, she wasn't on board. That's when Si-hwa pulled out his trump card. Smiling, he asked whether Yu-an might also be joining that club. The girl told him to quit flirting like that, but the moment Hae-rang heard Yuan's name, she practically ran over to him. She immediately agreed that he should join them, just in case the guy she liked was there too. Eun-so then said they should head home since Hae-rang had boxing practice later that day. Still, her biggest worry was how she'd ever pay him back for the expensive branded clothes she'd ruined. Si-hwa stepped closer and told her he needed to buy some new clothes. Hearing that, she just prayed he wouldn't make her buy them for him. She couldn't afford it. Nervously, she asked what kind of clothes he needed. But he answered that he needed proper sportswear for the new club, since all he had right now were casual clothes. Then he added that the clothes she'd thrown up on needed replacing too, because they'd been his favorite. Hearing that again, Eun-so felt awful and started apologizing over and over, asking whether the clothes were really ruined that badly. Deep down, he knew it was just clothing and not worth stressing over. But out loud, Si-hwa said that stuff like that usually gets ruined fast, and once the smell sets in, there's no way to save it. The guilt weighed down on her even harder, until suddenly someone shouted her name. A girl walked up and greeted them. Eun-so watched them start talking, not understanding what was going on. Si-hwa thanked the girl for her help last time and smiled warmly. She was surprised and asked if he really remembered her. He said of course he did. Out of nowhere, the girl turned to Eun-so and asked if she wanted to go on a blind date. She froze. The girl went on explaining that her friend wanted to meet her, but Eun-so quickly said she wasn't interested. The girl looked shocked that she'd turned it down. It was just a chance to meet someone. She even joked that Eun-so must really be a loner. That made Eun-so a little angry. She denied being a loner. The girl tilted her head, then guessed maybe Eun-so already had her eye on someone. Eun-so hadn't expected a question like that, especially with Si-hwa standing right there. She replied that she just didn't feel like going anywhere. Right then, Si-hwa cut in, asking whether she did have someone in mind. Calmly, she said no, there wasn't anyone. Si-hwa thought about it for a moment, not convinced she was telling the truth. Then Eun-so asked what department the guy who wanted to meet her was from. The girl said economics. She kept pressing, asking whether Eun-so had a boyfriend. After a few seconds, the girl finally said she'd agreed to the blind date. Both of them turned to her in surprise. They hadn't expected her to say yes. She repeated it, yes, she'd go. After all, what was the harm? Not long after, she was sitting at a cafe for the date, wearing a white dress, looking like she didn't feel all that comfortable. At the table sat two guys chatting with her. The one on the right was the one who wanted to get to know her. He suggested they drop the formalities. It would be easier to become friends that way. Even though this wasn't her first date, it was the first time she'd ever experienced something like this. She already didn't like their manners. During the conversation, the guy asked if she knew anyone from the economics department. She answered no, since she barely knew people outside her own department. In her head, though, she knew it was better not to bring up Si-hwa. He was surprised and offered to introduce her to people there, saying connections were everything. She refused. So he decided he'd just introduce her later, on their second date. But her attention was caught by something else. Right then, Si-hwa walked into the place, surrounded by girls all talking and laughing with him. The moment she saw him, she panicked and hoped he wouldn't notice her. But Si-hwa came up from behind, slipped an arm around her, and asked what she was doing there. She blushed, completely unprepared for him to show up, let alone come over to her. Si-hwa turned to the guys and asked if they really knew Eun-so. They greeted him back. Then he tapped her shoulder with his finger and told her there were 2 empty seats over there, so she should come join him. Eun-so looked up and saw him waving at her, saying they'd see each other later. She was confused. Why would they be seeing each other again? She watched as he casually sat down with the girls he'd come in with. The guy was thinking about how she'd claimed she had a blind date, and yet here she was with these random guys. The guys were listening to her talk. Eun-so told them about the time he got caught dating 2 girls at once and how they ganged up on him in the hallway, making a whole scene. She added that there had been plenty of rumors before that too, like him hitting on freshmen. The guy realized this girl really had no clue how to judge guys. Si-hwa caught her staring at him and decided to wink and flash a smile. That only made her more tense and annoyed. How did he even know where she was? And why was he here? The guys started grumbling. They knew tomorrow there'd be new rumors. The one on the left figured she was really into Kang Si-hwa, and the one on the right added that every girl had her eyes on him. Eun-so sat there listening as they trashed him, saying he must have had plastic surgery because his looks weren't natural. Hearing that, she decided to splash her drink right in the guy's face and snapped at him to take a look in the mirror first. He clearly hadn't expected that. Things escalated into a heated argument. Eun-so looked like she was ready to fight. The other guy pulled out his phone, saying he'd record everything, but suddenly Si-hwa appeared and knocked the phone right out of his hand. Eun-so froze in her fighting stance, not sure what was even happening anymore. The guy got angry, yelling that Kang Si-hwa had no business interfering. He threatened to file a report since he'd been recording, then suddenly realized his phone was gone. His phone had hit the ground near Si-hwa's feet. He reached for it, but the guy just pressed his foot down on the guy's hand. After dealing with those two, Si-hwa walked over to Eun-so, put a hand on her shoulder and asked if she was heading home already, then offered to walk with her. It looked like the guy's phone, the one he'd tried to film with, was broken. Smiling, Si-hwa started leading her out of the place. In the end, they did go home together. On the way, he mentioned he'd just remembered his uncle, though she didn't get who exactly he meant. She asked if he was talking about her dad. Smiling, he said yes. Si-hwa asked if her dad was still working as a detective. Eun-so admitted she wished he'd quit. It was dangerous, he was always busy, and her mom worried a lot. She added that just last year, he'd even been stabbed once. But Si-hwa thought it was actually pretty cool, not sad. Out of nowhere, he called her name. The girl blushed immediately and asked what was wrong. He started recalling stories of her fights and even mimicked her moves, but she denied it and got mad at him. Dropping the jokes, he told her to be more careful. She could end up running into someone really dangerous. In her head, Eun-so thought she'd never met a bigger lunatic than him. When he asked what was wrong, she just said everything was fine. Hearing that, Si-hwa admitted he just worried about her a little. That line made her pause. Why would he even be worried? Since they were already walking home together, she asked how he'd even known where she was. She hadn't told him where her date would be. He laughed and said it was pure coincidence. This cafe was one of the most popular spots near their department. She blushed harder, quickening her pace, embarrassed because he probably guessed what she was thinking. Suddenly, he reached out toward her hair. She noticed, but couldn't figure out what he was doing or why his hand was reaching for her. She closed her eyes, not knowing what to expect from him. However, when she opened her eyes, she was very surprised. He had taken a fallen cherry blossom petal out of her hair. Holding the petal in his hand, Si-hwa said that soon all the blossoms would fall, and yet he still hadn't had enough of the tree's beauty, since someone kept running away from him. She blushed and asked who was running away, but then realized that she really had been avoiding him. The guy pretended not to know who had been running away from him all this time, tossing the petal lightly in his hand. She didn't understand what he was doing and asked him about it. Si-hwa caught the petal in his hand and clenched his fist. When he opened it, there was a very beautiful, though small, flower in his palm. After that, he told her the saying that if you catch a falling cherry blossom petal, love will come true. But to the girl, it sounded like a line from some drama. Si-hwa happily suggested that if you catch a lot of petals, then maybe there would be a lot of love, or maybe more dates. He scooped a whole bunch of petals into his hand and stretched it out toward her to show her. Suddenly, he tossed all those petals in her direction, and she hadn't expected it at all. It seemed strange to her that he had done it so suddenly. But Eun-so wasn't able to catch even a single petal, and they all fell onto her hair and shoulders. The guy laughed since all of Eun-so's hair was now covered in petals. She began to get angry at him because he was laughing at her. Then, looking at her face, he reached toward her head, saying there was still one petal stuck there. He calmly pulled that petal from her hair but didn't do anything more. To the girl, it all felt very strange, since every one of his actions made her hope for something. Eun-so grabbed his hand to stop him. She asked why he was treating her this way. Didn't he really see her as just a friend and nothing more? She added that she didn't think she was strange, since he also thought about her. And now she was worried that maybe she had misunderstood everything again, just like before. In a sad tone, she asked why he had ruined her date. Eun-so recalled every recent moment when he had chosen not to leave her in different situations. But the guy thought that worrying about her was just natural, since they were very close. And for obvious things, no special reasons were needed. He believed he wasn't doing anything strange, since she cared about him too. He added that he hadn't ruined her blind date, since he hadn't actually done anything. And he asked if that date with the strange guy was really so important to her. Did she really need a boyfriend that much? but she understood his words differently, which made her very upset, even to the point of tearing up a little. Seeing that she was upset and starting to cry, Si-hwa hugged her and began apologizing, saying he had spoken wrongly. With tears in her eyes, Eun-so wanted to confess her feelings to him, but she didn't manage to finish the phrase. To her, everything he said meant only that he wanted to stay just friends with her. And suddenly, Si-hwa added that he would introduce her to someone better. She really hadn't expected that. Why had he even concluded that she needed to find another guy? But Si-hwa calmly explained that since she wanted to date someone, he would find her someone better than that guy from the cafe date. And he added that she had no instinct for good guys who suited her, and that guy clearly didn't. Right after this, when he began to walk away, she ran up from behind and reached out her hands, and Si-hwa didn't understand what she was doing. Eun-so began shoving him in anger, since he had really upset her by not understanding anything. She started to walk away, saying that if he ever suffered, she wouldn't just let it be. Eun-so began running away while Si-hwa tried to stop her and talk. But now in her own mind, she set a boundary, that she must not fall in love with him again. And as she ran away from him, a guy in black clothes holding a phone was walking toward her. She ran right past him, which made him turn to see who that girl was. He even dropped his call when someone had been ringing him. And he just stood there, watching this girl who was a stranger to him. But she ran so quickly that he didn't even notice when she vanished from his sight. He then got a call from Hae-rang. She asked why he had hung up on her, and the guy replied that he had done it by accident. After Eun-so went home alone, the guy decided after a while to stop by her place and knock. He knocked and asked if she was asleep. The girl was already lying in bed. When he realized she wasn't going to open the door, he began calling her phone, but she didn't pick up, because now he just irritated her too much. The next morning, she went to the cafe. It was clear she hadn't slept well after everything. Hae-rang noticed and asked what had happened to her. But Eun-so looked at her and saw she was in the same state, so she asked her to share what was going on too. With a troubled expression, Hae-rang began telling her what had happened. She told her friend about the meeting when she had to exchange phones. She had gotten extremely flustered and kept apologizing. For the guy, though, it was uncomfortable to watch, since nothing serious had happened. Eun calmly told Hae-rang there was no need to apologize so much, that everything was fine, and the most important thing was that the phone had been found. But while talking to him, she was completely smitten and thought of him as a true angel. She kept staring at him even after giving back the phone. Eun said it was time for him to go, and in his mind he knew that if he kept talking with her, it would only get exhausting. And when he started leaving, she grabbed his hand and offered to at least buy him a coffee, since she felt so awkward about the situation. But the guy replied that there was no need. He hadn't done anything special for her. In that moment, he again noticed how she was just standing there, staring at him with love-struck eyes. Eun pulled his hand back and, with slight unease, answered that his next class was starting, so he had to go. And all this time, Hae-rang just kept looking at him like he was a miracle. After telling the story, she added that she had probably made a terrible first impression on him. And so just couldn't understand how this had happened and how she hadn't noticed the phone wasn't hers. But then she realized, with Hae-rang, this was actually a very possible situation. Eun-so comforted her friend and told her not to worry, since everything was fine. And besides, they shared some classes, so she'd have another chance to apologize to him. Hearing that thought, Hae-rang lit up again and was already looking forward to next Thursday so she could apologize again and make things right. Suddenly, she asked Eun-so whether she really liked this guy. Hae-rang answered that to her. He was like an angel and a princess, because for some reason, she wanted to protect him. Eun-so hadn't expected to hear that. After sorting out her situation, Hae-rang asked how her blind date had gone yesterday. Eun-so told her it had been fine, but then those guys started making noise, trying to film, and so on. And suddenly, while Eun-so was talking about it, she remembered Si-hwa's words. "Do you really need a boyfriend that much?" At that memory, her face instantly changed, and Hae-rang noticed it. Then they continued their conversation about a train club. Eun-so thought her friend had already found like 20 people for it, but Hae-rang said there would only be 4 of them. Eun-so asked if that included Kang Si-hwa and that other guy, but her friend said Si-hwa wouldn't be there. Eun-so felt relieved, since she didn't want to see or deal with him again. During their conversation, Hae-rang noticed someone she knew approaching them. Eun-so turned and saw the black-haired guy she had met before. As soon as she saw him, she recognized him, remembering she had seen him somewhere before. When he sat down next to her, she felt a bit uncomfortable being there. She was shocked that Hae-rang knew him and couldn't understand how she had even met such a scary guy. But what bothered her now was that he was suspiciously looking in her direction. Did he remember her? Suddenly, he gently brushed her hair aside to fully see Eun-seo's face. Their eyes met directly. The guy recognized her and said she was that curious girl from the chicken restaurant alley. She felt very uncomfortable that he had touched her without asking. She immediately slapped his hand away, since she didn't consider that normal at all. The guy didn't understand what she was doing or why she had hit him, since he just hadn't been sure if it was really her. And he added that if he had mistaken her for someone else, then he apologized. Hanen started getting angry at him, saying that he had scared Eun-seo, and she also apologized to her friend. Then she introduced him as Ji-hyun. After that, Eun-seo decided to look at him again. She realized he wasn't a freshman. Remembering that situation, she realized it had just been a run-in with upperclassmen. Hanen then said that since they were the same age, they could speak informally, but Ji-hyun added that he was younger. After that, Hanen suggested they discuss when they would start their RAN train session. In that crowd of people, Si-hwa was also standing, typing a message to Eun-seo, but she wasn't replying, even though he could see that she was right there in the cafe with Hanen and some guy. That made him stop and think for a bit, planning what to do next. But after a while, his phone vibrated, and he thought it was a message. However, it wasn't from her. It was a call from Kang Si-hwa. Meanwhile, Eun-seo went home to change. She stepped out of her room to check if Si-hwa had come home yet. Their rooms were very close to each other. She realized he wasn't home, so she quickly headed out for the meeting. Out on the street, Hanen was already waiting for her, waving when she saw her. It was their first day going for a run. Her friend was really excited that so many people were exercising, even though it was hot outside. At the moment when they were talking about how cool it was to exercise, Si-hwa called her. From her face, it was obvious she wasn't happy about it. Hanen noticed that she didn't pick up and asked what had happened. Eun-seo answered that it was just spam and there was no need to answer, so she declined the call, since lately there had been a lot of spam. They decided to do a short warm-up before running, and after some time, Ji-hyun joined them. Now the whole team was together. It felt awkward for them to see each other, but Eun-seo nervously greeted him. The guy, however, stayed calm and greeted her back. The girl decided to suggest that they install an app for joint runs, and it turned out to be a good idea. After successfully installing the app, they started their first run together. The girl didn't feel very comfortable in her new sneakers because she needed to wear longer socks. So today she would have to run a little slower, since she didn't want to get blisters on her feet. Ji-hyun noticed that Eun-seo had started running slower, so he decided to stop, but the girl didn't understand why he had done that. He asked if she was already tired and added that he'd heard she used to do track and field with Hanen. She didn't expect him to say that she was tired and answered that he shouldn't pay attention to her and should just run at his own pace. After that short exchange, he asked her what she wanted to ask him last time. But that question really puzzled her. When was that? When had she wanted to ask him something but hadn't? In her thoughts, she began recalling all the moments when she had seen him. The guy realized he had puzzled her with this question, and maybe she really didn't remember, so he decided to continue the training. A few seconds later, Eun-seo decided to ask her own question instead, and asked if he was friends with Hanen. Ji-hyun looked at her in surprise. Realizing what she had just asked, Eun-seo began apologizing since it was a strange question. It was just that she found it odd that Hanen usually gathered a big group of people, but this time brought only one person. She thought she probably shouldn't have asked. She was curious about what their relationship was. Were they just friends or something else? Because at first glance, they seemed close. After thinking for a moment, the guy answered that he didn't know if it could really be called friendship. Eun-seo was surprised and asked what he meant. But just then, someone ran up from behind and tapped him on the back. It was Hanen, who had already managed to finish one lap. She joked that they were running pretty slowly. The guy called her a squirrel, and Eun-seo didn't know where that nickname came from. The guy explained that it went back to when they used to go to the gym together, and that's what people called her there. A small playful fight broke out between them, while Eun-seo watched, realizing that they really were pretty close. Suddenly, they started talking about boxing, and Hanen said she wanted to try it right now to relieve the stress from her blind date. And within seconds, their run turned into an idea to go for a boxing workout. Ji-hyun couldn't understand how they communicated like that and made decisions so quickly. Eun-seo turned to him and asked if he really wasn't going with them to another workout. The guy hesitated, realizing he didn't want to be left alone, so he agreed to join them. After the boxing workout, they went to rest. And it seemed like Eun-seo wasn't feeling too well. Hanen laughed and told her that after a few sessions, she would quickly get used to it. Suddenly, Si-hwa called her again, clearly wanting something from her. Hae-rang was surprised that the girl finally picked up the call and answered. Si-hwa was glowing and looked very stylish. He loudly said that she had finally answered him. Looking to the side, she saw that he was actually there. She didn't understand why he had even come, since his department building was far from here, and especially since he was walking around the school in sunglasses. To that question, he gestured that he wanted to introduce her to Yu-an, who was already standing next to him. The guy seemed to be in a good mood, introduced himself, and added that they had probably seen each other in the other department before. Eun-so greeted him back. She felt awkward since this all happened so suddenly for her. Suddenly, she remembered Si-hwa's words about how he was planning to introduce her to someone better than that guy at the cafe. When Hae-rang saw this guy again, she lit up, since she was in love with him. It was so unexpected that Eun-so asked if this meeting was supposed to be for the group project they had been assigned. But Si-hwa said no. This meeting was for introductions. He didn't have time to finish before Eun-so reached for his face. She covered his mouth and warned that if he said anything about it, she would get very angry and do something bad. A little later, when they were already outside, Si-hwa asked how she liked the meeting. He asked if she liked Hyun-yu-an, the one he had planned to introduce her to. She wanted to say that it wasn't about whether she liked him or not, since he already knew perfectly well that Hae-rang liked him, but she didn't say it. Instead, she decided it was useless to talk with him, so she just answered yes. After that, she took out her phone and asked Si-hwa to give her Yuan's number. He pulled out his phone and said he would send her the number in the chat. Suddenly, she heard a voice apologizing for approaching so unexpectedly during their conversation. She noticed that right next to them stood Yu-an himself, who might have overheard their conversation. She was totally shocked when she turned her head and saw him there. Eun-so quickly started telling him that she didn't mean it like she didn't like it. She explained that Kang Si-hwa always acts that way, and she honestly doesn't get what he's thinking in those moments. After all, they weren't as close as they used to be, and she had no idea what he was planning. The girl added that she felt like he didn't care at all about what she thought. But then she realized she was just rambling nonsense, and she should probably stop. Si-hwa decided to switch the topic and mentioned how worried Hae-rang had been when they were sitting at the cafe. Yu-an looked surprised, a little embarrassed, and asked why she was worried when they were all sitting together at the table. Eun-so knew the answer but couldn't say it outright. Back at the cafe, they had talked about how they'd have to study together, and maybe Appa would feel awkward. Yu-an replied that everything was fine, that he'd already found his phone and asked her to tell Hae-rang not to worry. While he was talking, he seemed like such a kind person, almost glowing. Meanwhile, Si-hwa was chatting with a girl who had come up to him. In the group chat, he'd learned that people called some guy the Rainbow. The girl started saying that she thought she knew who this guy was and shared her thoughts. It was him, Si-hwa. But suddenly, he just said that something was bugging him, without explaining what, and the girl couldn't figure out what he meant. She looked at him nervously, not understanding what exactly was bothering him. Si-hwa calmly said he just didn't like it when people gossiped behind someone's back. At that moment, Hae-rang was passing by and saw them talking. She called out his name, waving, clearly wanting to tell him something or chat. But he just started walking away, since his conversation with the girl was over, maybe not even hearing that she'd called him. She felt a little thrown off, confused by the situation. Si-hwa went back to his car. He was starting to get uneasy about the fact that he was really popular among the students at their school. But as he sat in the car, thinking about everything, his phone suddenly rang. It was his dad. He hadn't expected a call from his father, but he picked up anyway. His father told him that this weekend would be the anniversary of his mom's death, so he asked him to at least come have dinner together that evening. He put on his black suit and picked up a bouquet of flowers. His mood, to say the least, wasn't great. He had left home before because another woman was living there, trying to replace his mom, and he couldn't stand being in the same space with her. Eun-so was worried about him and called, but for some reason he wouldn't answer. At that time, Si-hwa was sitting on the floor in his suit with the flowers beside him, holding his phone, looking completely wrecked. His hand was also injured. Eun-so texted him, asking him to at least reply in chat if he didn't want to talk on the phone. When they went for a run, the street was packed with people doing all kinds of things. Even though they were the only ones actually running, they still kept at it. Hae-rang jokingly suggested that the next day they should come back here. Not to run, but to bring drinks and a blanket, since the weather was perfect for relaxing outside. But Eun-so's mind was elsewhere. Si-hwa hadn't been home for several days, and maybe today would be no different. She started thinking that something might have happened to him. Lost in those thoughts, she didn't hear Haerang's question at first. But when she asked again, Eun-so snapped back to reality and agreed with her idea. She mentioned that Ji-hyun gets tipsy really easily, but he denied it, saying that the two of them just drank way too much. During the run, she noticed again that her sneakers weren't great for long runs, even though they had felt fine in the morning. That day, practically everything was bugging her. Even the shoes, which she realized she should swap out for another pair. Ji-hyun and Haerang noticed that she had stopped, so they asked what was wrong. Eun-so said it was fine. She'd just gotten a pebble in her shoe, so she had to stop. After quickly fixing it, she said everything was fine now and they could keep running. The guy said it looked like she was tired, but she denied it, insisting that wasn't the case. And then suddenly, her phone rang again. She grabbed it quickly. It was Si-hwa, who hadn't been answering for so long. Out of nowhere, her friends heard her ask loudly, with real panic in her voice, where he was. She was asking him questions, where he was if something had happened. Ji-hyun stood there, watching, not understanding what was going on. Si-hwa said he was at the stadium, and suddenly she shouted "stadium" out loud, looking around like she was searching for someone. Right after that, he hung up and ended the call. Eun-so suddenly picked up her pace and started heading somewhere. Ji-hyun and Haerang just stood there, watching her. Off to the side stood Si-hwa in his suit, smiling as he greeted them. The guy asked if she'd been working out. By then, she was already running toward him. The girl grabbed him and started yelling at him for not answering her calls and now acting like nothing had happened. She told him she'd been worried sick, thinking something had happened to him all this time. Si-hwa smiled again and said he was totally fine, asking if she had actually been worried about him. That made her even madder. And the very next second, she started hitting him, yelling that of course she had worried about him. She'd imagined all sorts of things and had really been scared. After a little while, she calmed down and told him he drove her crazy. Right then, he put a hand on her shoulder and asked if she was hurt, since he noticed she was walking a little funny. Eun-so said no, but Si-hwa reminded her that as a kid, she used to walk the same way when she had blisters on her heels, and told her to show him her foot. Flustered, she answered that it really wasn't a big deal. At that moment, she felt awkward. He crouched down and checked her foot, noticing the skin was red in that spot. He asked if it hurt every time she walked, but she just stared at him. Frozen, Si-hwa reached out his arms and offered to carry her if she was tired, or he could give her a piggyback ride. Eun-so blushed and got angry, snapping that she wasn't that tired. But in the middle of their argument, she noticed his hands, scratched up and covered in band-aids. The girl grew worried and started asking what had happened to them. But instead of explaining, he brushed it off again, saying it was nothing serious. That only made Eun-so angrier, because with him, everything was always no big deal. Holding her close, he suddenly asked if they had started a club. Haerang nervously explained that the guy with them was Ji-hyun, who would be joining their club and that he was their age. Si-hwa seemed to remember him and asked if they'd met before, maybe in an economics class? But Ji-hyun said probably not, since he didn't recall him. With his arm practically around Eun-so, Si-hwa looked surprised at that answer and asked if she could leave early today since she was injured. They said goodbye and left together, his hand still on her shoulder. He suggested going to the hospital, but when Eun-so asked if he wanted to go, he gave the usual answer, that he was fine. Haerang stayed with Ji-hyun. She was relieved they had finally met since she'd been worried about him. Ji-hyun asked why Eun-so had been so worried about Si-hwa. Haerang explained that they were really close, childhood friends, and she had only been worried because she couldn't reach him. Now Ji-hyun understood it wasn't about her being tired. Back at home, Si-hwa crashed right on the couch in the living room, even though he had his own room. It was like he felt completely at home there. Eun-so thought about waking him up, but felt awkward doing so. She was about to check the wounds on his hand when he suddenly woke up and asked what she was doing. Of course, she hadn't expected him to wake up so quickly and just blurted out that she'd been looking at his hands. She couldn't understand why he kept quiet about what had happened to him and couldn't tell her the truth. She told him now he wouldn't even be able to play the piano. But deep down, she just wanted to know what really happened. Again, Si-hwa shrugged it off, saying it wasn't a big deal. Eun-so snapped at him. Since he always said nothing was wrong, then why did he keep coming home injured? Si-hwa couldn't understand why she was suddenly so upset about this. She told him she'd known him long enough to see that he clearly wasn't okay, yet he kept insisting he was fine and even joked about it. Then she added that if he really wasn't okay, he should just say it outright. But in that moment, she realized maybe she was being too harsh with him and wondered why she always blew up around him like this. Si-hwa didn't argue back. He just asked if she wanted to sleep. Suddenly, he grabbed her hand and decided to make her a suggestion. Smiling, still holding her hand, he told her once again that he really was fine, and then asked if she wanted to go to the beach with him. Eun-so couldn't believe what she just heard and stared at him, wide-eyed. She was shocked he even had a car, and that he'd never mentioned it. He laughed and asked if that was really something he had to tell her. Together, they left the car and headed for the beach at night. Si-hwa was planning to tell her that he no longer played piano, but he didn't know how to put it. Eun-so listened carefully, watching him, remembering how much he used to love playing. He admitted he thought about it all the time and that his mom had loved listening to him play. That was why he stopped, so he wouldn't sink back into sadness. Showing her his hand, he said the wound wasn't serious, it didn't even hurt, so that wasn't the reason. The girl held his hand and looked at the wound closely, curious about how it happened. Eun-so asked if he had done it himself, and when he admitted yes, she was about to ask why. But he didn't really want to answer, so he brushed it off again, saying it was just a small thing. But Eun-so looked really sad, and she truly wanted to know the truth. Finally, he decided to tell her about it. He said he had gone home briefly on the anniversary of his mom's death. When he walked inside, the first thing he saw were yellow roses, and for a moment he felt comforted. In that instant, it was like his mom had come back. But then he realized it was the new woman who had put the flowers there. Yellow roses had been the very first gift his dad had ever given his mom. And every time life got hard for her, his dad would fill that vase with yellow roses. That was why his mom had loved them so much. But now, seeing that same vase filled by the woman he couldn't stand, he had no choice but to smash it. Afterward, he just sat there, grieving, feeling like his mom was all alone without a single flower. And that was the whole story of how he hurt his hand. It weighed heavy on Eun-so. She didn't want him to suffer even more. Trying to lighten his mood, Si-hwa ran into the sea, splashing her with water. After all, they'd come to the beach, and yet their conversation had turned so dark. He called her over, wanting to have fun with her since the water was warm. But Eun-so just felt embarrassed and couldn't bring herself to relax. She was starting to realize that all this time he'd been smiling and acting like everything was fine. And whenever she spent time with him or ran into him, she always thought he was okay. But now she knew. Things had never been as fine as he kept saying. He had been pretending all along. As she was thinking about all this, he grabbed her wrist. Holding her hand, he once again repeated that he was perfectly fine now. She just stared at him, not knowing what words could possibly comfort him. Not even sure how to respond to him saying yet again that he was okay. All Eun-so wanted was for him to truly be happy again, to smile genuinely like he used to, and to see her as a friend he could always count on. The next morning, when Eun-so woke up, she heard Si-hwa's voice asking if she was awake. Opening her eyes, she found herself staring at his bare torso and his smile. She definitely hadn't expected that first thing in the morning and couldn't make sense of what was happening. Si-hwa suggested she go take a shower first, since she was already awake, while she just sat there in shock. She tried to piece her thoughts together, trying to remember what happened yesterday, how she had ended up in bed next to him. He started heading to the shower himself since she didn't respond, but suddenly she asked him to stop. Looking closer, she noticed all the fresh scratches across his body. She couldn't believe something might have happened between them that night. She tried to recall what did happen yesterday. They'd gone to grab something to eat. She'd wanted a drink and offered him one, but since he was driving, he refused. So she decided to drink for him. He tried to stop her, knowing she was already tipsy. But she wasn't having it, insisting she could handle it this time. Realizing the situation, she figured she must have said a lot of dumb things. She also couldn't understand why her whole body ached, like she'd gone through intense physical training. But when she looked down, she realized she wasn't wearing a bra. Her face turned crimson. She couldn't even remember taking it off. Closing her eyes, she just hoped this was all a dream she'd wake up from. Just then, Si-hwa came closer, noticing something was wrong, and asked if she was feeling okay. But looking at him, she couldn't say anything. Her mind kept circling the same thought. Had something really happened between them? Nervous and trembling, Eun-so finally asked him outright if anything had happened. The moment she asked, his expression changed instantly, and he froze for a few seconds. She didn't understand why he stayed silent and pressed him with more questions. Then Si-hwa leaned in close with a sly grin and asked if she really didn't remember, or if she was just pretending. That made her start to believe something really had happened. He added that if she was pretending, he was actually a little hurt by that. His words left Eun-so completely flustered and stunned. Si-hwa went on to say that last night she had clung to him first and refused to go home. Hearing that, she quickly covered his mouth, pretending she remembered, when really, she was just embarrassed. And by the time she'd almost convinced herself to believe it too, he asked if she was going to take responsibility for it. However, Eun-so was confused because she didn't know what kind of responsibility she was supposed to take. The next day, during a jog, Haerang noticed that her friend looked very tired and in a strange state. She didn't know what to do now, since she was finally planning to just be friends. But then this unplanned situation happened. Si-hwa tried to text her so she would reply, but she ignored him all day. And the next time he met her, she literally tried to hide from him, avoiding his eyes whenever possible. But when she realized he noticed her, she just turned around, waved her hand, said hi, and ran off. After that, she immediately tried to run into her room to lock herself inside. However, he managed to block the door with his hand and didn't let her in. Now Eun-so realized she couldn't run away from him to avoid conversations, since she had been trying to hide from him the whole day. Calling her by name, he asked why she had been avoiding him all day. The girl didn't even know what to answer to that question. He leaned in very close to her again and said he noticed that every time she's mad, she keeps avoiding him. Si-hwa added that, while she was slipping away, he didn't even notice at first, and that upset her a lot. However, she didn't remember ever saying such a thing before, but she began recalling last night. When she was very drunk, she told him that his antics really annoyed her, because she worried every time he disappeared somewhere. That night, Si-hwa was surprised and apologized to her with a smile. When the guy realized she remembered this, he started laughing again, which only irritated her. Once again, he leaned closer to her face and asked if she really thought they had slept together. From such an awkward question, the girl's face turned red again and her expression looked flustered. She didn't even know what to answer to his question, because she simply didn't remember what had really happened that night since she drank way too much. When Si-hwa realized that she truly didn't know whether they slept together or not, his expression changed. Because could it be that she really thought of him as a bad person? After that, he said that he wasn't just disappointed, but also angry at her, because he never expected her to think of him that way. She tried to stop him to explain everything, but the guy asked her to leave him alone. But she couldn't understand one thing he had said, so she stopped him and grabbed his sleeve. She showed him the scratches on his arms and asked if it wasn't her who did that to him that day. The guy calmly answered that she had been mad at him and even pulled his hair. The girl was shocked when she heard that. Si-hwa also showed her that she had even bitten him near his neck. She looked at the bite mark and couldn't believe she could have done something like that. It seemed impossible. Her fingers even trembled a little. She still had one more thing she couldn't understand. Her body and lower back ached. The guy answered that she was so unruly they nearly fought, and she also refused to get in the car. When he picked her up, she started pinching and biting him. It was obvious she was embarrassed by her actions. She then asked about that moment when he said she should take responsibility for it. The guy answered that it had only been a joke. Eun-so got angry again. Why didn't he explain everything right away? Si-hwa smiled a little, thinking he had the right to joke with her a bit after everything he had gone through that day, and that she should at least listen to his complaints. He began showing her videos on his phone of how she looked that night. Eun-so was sitting next to the car, sulking, insisting she would only do what she wanted, and refusing to even talk to him. And when he told her that she already always did whatever she wanted, she got mad, since that was exactly what he did. Then she noticed he was recording her, and she tried to grab his phone. She almost fell to the ground in the process. After showing her the videos, he asked if she believed him now. He also told her that at first her behavior was even funny, and he decided to record it just in case she pretended to forget everything. Si-hwa himself was surprised he even thought of recording, because without it, he would have looked like the bad guy. Now it seemed she finally understood that nothing had really happened between them. In anger, she pushed him away hard with her hands. She was mad because he hadn't told her everything right away, but dragged it out for a long time. But the guy replied that he had tried to talk to her, but she kept avoiding him, even starting from the ride back in the car, when she pretended to sleep. He also tried to talk to her in the morning, at school, but she hid from him or locked herself away, and even ignored his messages. When she realized she had indeed acted exactly that way, she got a little flustered and didn't know what to say. But she decided to be honest and said she did it because she was upset with him. He was already sitting on the couch, saying it was his fault if in her eyes he was such a horrible person, even though he put up with her drunken outbursts and cleaned up her vomit. And he added that last time she even threw up on him. Eun-so realized the situation wasn't very good. She apologized to him. But when Si-hwa heard this, he said it didn't sound sincere. She replied that she truly was apologizing because he really did suffer a lot because of her. She asked about the condition of his hand and requested to take a look at it. But when she looked at his hands, she noticed that now his left hand also had wounds that weren't there yesterday. Si-hwa answered ironically that he got these new wounds while restraining a wild and drunk person. She rolled her eyes, apologized again, and said she would bring medicine now. The guy called her by name and asked her not to avoid him anymore, and if she felt upset to just tell him about it. Eun-so got a little angry, because it seemed like he was mocking her already. Noticing that she started getting upset again, he placed his hand over hers. He explained that he really didn't like when she avoided him. At first, she said he was talking nonsense, but when he asked if she understood him, Eun-so replied that she would think about it. Suddenly, Si-hwa's phone rang while they were talking. He picked up the call and stepped a little to the side. Someone invited him to lunch tomorrow. But the guy replied that he wasn't sure if he could make it. Meanwhile, Eun-so put down the medicine and said to leave it in the storage room. When she started leaving, the guy took her hand and asked her to wait. Eun-so hadn't expected that, but she seemed to already be getting used to such moments. With a smile on his face, Si-hwa suggested they go to the university together tomorrow. The girl found this a bit strange since he suggested it so suddenly. But Eun-so remembered she had morning classes, and it seemed he didn't even know about that. Yet, after a minute, she agreed to go with him. The guy just watched her leave without saying anything. He then got a call from an unknown person who invited him to eat together. However, during the call, he looked in Eun-so's direction and replied that he would be busy all day tomorrow. That night, the girl was sleeping soundly in her room. Si-hwa quietly came in and asked why she loved him. He added, "Was it because of his looks and toned body?" Eun-so, still asleep, answered yes. When he lightly touched her face and hair with his finger, she said in her sleep that she loved him. And after that, she even asked for forgiveness. He gently touched her lips with his fingers while she slept. Hearing that she was asking for forgiveness even in her sleep, he said she didn't need to do that and asked her to just keep loving him. After caressing her face and hair, his hand retained the pleasant scent of her perfume and shampoo. The next day, he was already at the university campus. A blonde-haired girl came up behind him and called his name. "Oppa Si-hwa." She asked what he was doing there. Didn't he have classes? The guy replied that he didn't. The girl was a little surprised, since yesterday he told her he'd be busy. And now that he was free, she suggested they have lunch together, since she had no more classes. But suddenly her expression turned puzzled. Instead of answering her invitation, he just picked up his phone. The girl was surprised and asked again if he even heard her. But Si-hwa began to get up from the table and replied that he was busy now. The girl didn't understand him, since a minute ago he said he wasn't busy. At that moment, he texted Eun-so with a suggestion to have lunch together. And to the blonde girl, he said something had suddenly come up, so he couldn't go with her. Eun-so was receiving messages from him inviting her to lunch, reminding her that she promised not to avoid him anymore. But she didn't say how she would answer. Well, Hanen also invited her to lunch. They went outside, and her friend asked how her leg was. Eun-so said it was nothing serious, but she wore slippers to walk more comfortably. Hanen and Eun-so were heading to the cafeteria, discussing today's menu. But among the crowd, she noticed someone. It was Si-hwa, standing and looking at his phone. Suddenly, he lifted his head and began looking directly at her. The girl was, to put it mildly, shocked, because she didn't understand what he was doing there. He walked up to her, gently took her hand, and asked why she left in the morning without him. After all, they agreed to go to university together. With a charming expression, he asked if she had done it on purpose, even though she had promised not to avoid him anymore. But the girl hadn't expected such behavior from him at all. After all, everyone around them saw this and whispered, saying they claimed to be just friends, yet now they were holding hands. The guy started leading the girl away to the side since people were actively talking about it, and even the chat was full of messages suggesting they were dating. They managed to run away quickly and stopped to rest. Eun-so got mad at him and began asking why he suddenly showed up and said such things when there were so many people around, everyone would misunderstand them. But Si-hwa started playing the pity card, telling her how he had knocked on her door that morning and she wasn't there, even though he had waited to go to the university together. Hearing this, she apologized, though in her mind she wondered why she even had to apologize for that. She explained that she had overheard him making plans with someone over the phone and thought he only said it to her casually. But the guy was surprised, insisting he had always been sincere with her and hadn't said it just casually. He leaned his head against her, almost playfully, but it was heavy for her. He remarked that she was holding up pretty well, strong on her own, and even joked that she could probably carry him in her arms. But Eun-so replied that she had no desire to do that. Why would she ever carry him like that? He countered that he could also get sick, but Eun-so told him if that happens, he should just go to the hospital himself. he found her response a little harsh. They were walking down the street, and Eun-so suggested they stop to eat or grab a coffee since she wanted to treat him, but he said no. The girl was surprised. It was as if he hadn't even heard her. Suddenly, he put his hand on her shoulder and quickly led her somewhere. Without explaining anything, he just steered her toward a shop. Once inside, he picked out a pair of sneakers in size 38 for her. She stood there, puzzled. Why had he suddenly decided to buy her new sneakers? Si-hwa explained that her heels hurt because of bad shoes, so he wanted to get her something comfortable. Eun-so argued it wasn't necessary to buy new sneakers. She could endure a few more days and just wear thicker socks. But it mattered to him that she wasn't in pain and felt comfortable. So he sat her down and asked what colors she liked. She decided not to argue and said she would like white sneakers. They picked out pretty white sneakers that she really liked the look of. The pair was very soft and comfortable. She wondered if maybe she really should get new ones, just like he said. But then she remembered she had just bought shoes recently. He even crouched down to tie her shoelaces for her. Eun-so watched with slight embarrassment, her face blushing. After tying them, he asked if her heels felt fine in these sneakers. He told her to let him know if even this pair turned out uncomfortable, since he wanted to make sure she got a really good one. Suddenly, instead of answering, Eun-so loudly asked him to give her a mirror. She started looking around the store to find one. The girl tried on 2 pairs of sneakers, one white and one black. She hesitated, unsure which to choose, so she asked his opinion. But she was surprised when he didn't answer, so she turned her head to look at him. She saw him already standing at the counter and realized she had been asking her questions when he wasn't even nearby. She decided on one pair and took her old sneakers with her as well. She walked out of the store right away in her new white sneakers. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling she had done something wrong. On the way, the guy remembered she had her club tomorrow and asked if she was going. When she said yes, he smiled sweetly and said he wanted to go too. Eun-so was shocked. Was he serious? It all felt suspicious, and she had no idea what was going on. Si-hwa was surprised too, since it seemed like she didn't believe him. But her friend remarked that he never liked sports and asked if he'd even be comfortable there. He smiled and replied that he'd manage, since he would be there with her. That evening, Eun-so went to practice with her friend. Hae-rang noticed that Eun-so seemed a bit off today and guessed that she was tired of the seniors and guys who kept asking to be introduced to her. But really, Eun-so was exhausted by all the constant talk and speculation about her supposedly dating Kang Si-hwa. Hae-rang mentioned that he had been popular since childhood, but Eun-so asked how she even knew that. After a moment's thought, she replied that people talk a lot about him these days. And with such a handsome face, of course, he couldn't help but be popular. Her friend wondered if he'd actually show up at practice today, but Eun-so assumed not since he hadn't texted her. Just then, Ji-hyun came up to Hae-rang and greeted them. But suddenly, both of them started staring at Eun-so with surprise. She didn't understand what was happening or why they were looking at her like that. And then, unexpectedly, the guy came up from behind and greeted her. Eun-so was stunned. He had really come. Si-hwa explained that he had wanted to invite Yuan too, but he had a meeting today, though he'd try to bring him next time. Hearing that, Hae-rang lit up and thanked him, since she would really love to meet him. The girl happily raised her racket and announced that today they'd be playing badminton, and how great it was that she'd brought a couple of extra rackets. When she asked if Eun-so's leg was okay, her friend smiled and said she was wearing thick socks today and had even changed her sneakers. Right after that, Eun-so caught Kang Si-hwa's pleased look and blushed instantly. After a few sets, Hae-rang finally noticed her friend's new sneakers, pointed at them, and asked if they were the ones that had been advertised recently, and if they were comfortable. Eun-so said they were super comfortable, and her friend started asking what other colors they came in because she wanted a pair too. Si-hwa watched the girls with a satisfied grin, but suddenly he realized he wasn't the only one staring at the girls so intently. Ji-hyun was also listening closely and noticed the jealous look in Si-hwa's eyes. Si-hwa immediately decided to make it clear that Eun-so belonged to him. He ran his hand over the back of her head, saying she'd worked so hard she was all sweaty. The feeling of his fingers gently brushing through her hair and touching her nape gave her goosebumps, and her cheeks turned pink. So she started fanning herself with her hands and said that today really was hotter than usual. Then Kang Si-hwa wrapped one arm around her, pulled her closer, and started fanning her, saying he could help. But her face grew even redder, and she pushed him away, saying she was fine, and that she probably smelled like sweat. He just smiled, caught her hand, and said she smelled the same as always, that her scent was still as pleasant as ever. Eun-so froze. What is with this guy today? She thought, while her friends in the background were just as shocked. The next second, Ji-hyun stood up and said he'd go to the store for water, while Eun-so said she'd head to the sink. A few days later, Eun-so was standing in the middle of a perfume shop, trying to pick a new scent. Suddenly, Si-hwa appeared behind her, placed a hand on her shoulder, and asked if she was picking out a gift for someone. He looked as stylish as always and, smiling, asked if she was picking out a perfume as a gift for him. She was flustered. How could someone think about themselves all the time? She finally explained that she was choosing a new perfume for herself, but there were so many scents that she'd gotten a headache and couldn't decide. While she stood there lost in thought, Si-hwa picked a fragrance and asked the consultant to bring it over. He knew she liked grassy scents, so he was sure she'd love his choice. Eun-so was skeptical. But when he handed her the tester, she froze in surprise. It really was perfect. Si-hwa smiled and said she preferred the forest over the ocean, which is why she liked earthy and woody scents. Maybe that's why you came to this plant-filled shop? He teased. Eun-so pouted like she used to when she was little. She couldn't deny he was right. Later that night, she lay on her bed staring at the perfume bottle. Si-hwa had insisted on gift wrapping it and paid for it himself. She had her own money, but he insisted it was a gift from him. And now she was blushing all over again, punching her pillow. Lately, he'd been giving her a lot of presents. After tossing and turning all night, she barely fell asleep by morning. And now she was running late for class. She rushed out of the house. But as if he'd been waiting for her, Si-hwa popped out from behind and offered her a ride. She eyed him suspiciously and asked if he'd ask for something in return. He was honestly surprised and said no. He helped her get in the car, and Eun-so wondered what had gotten into her friend lately. Ever since that night, he'd been acting strange. But she didn't want to believe it meant anything to him. He was probably just messing around. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice Si-hwa staring at her, waiting for something, until she asked what was wrong. Suddenly, he leaned in and reached out his hand. Eun-so froze. Was he going to kiss her? But a playful smile tugged at his lips. He leaned over just to buckle her seatbelt. Meanwhile, she found herself staring at his neck and collarbones. Just being that close to him made her cheeks flush pink again. Kang Si-hwa smirked and said he thought she'd been waiting for him to do it personally. Blushing to her roots, she stammered that she hadn't been waiting for anything. She'd just zoned out and forgotten the seatbelt. When they finally got to campus, Eun-so thanked him for the ride and asked if he didn't have class today. He said he had a gap in his schedule. That surprised her. She thought he'd given her a ride because it was on his way. Now she felt guilty. As if reading her mind, Si-hwa smirked and said, "What? Feeling guilty now?" Then he suggested they have lunch together. He'd nap while she was in class. Was he seriously going to sleep here? In the car? Casually, he pulled out a sleep mask and said he would. He hadn't slept well last night. Eun-so went to class completely confused. His behavior was weird. Maybe he just wanted to score a free lunch? Later, when they had lunch, they both reached for the payment terminal at the same time. Si-hwa insisted on paying. She was flustered again. Lately, he'd been paying for everything, and her debt to him kept growing. Then she accidentally saw his driver's license in his wallet and was shocked. Had he already gotten it? He laughed and reminded her that he'd just given her a ride. Eun-so asked to see it, then smirked and teased him about his hairstyle. "Why'd you slick all your hair back?" He said it was the rule, and he ended up using his passport photo. Then he asked to see her photo because he wanted to tease her too. She said she didn't have a license yet. When he asked to see her passport photo instead, Eun-so broke out in a cold sweat. There was no way, absolutely no way, she'd ever show that embarrassing picture. She tried to quickly close her wallet, but he leaned in so close that his breath tickled her skin and whispered softly that he really wanted to see it. While Eun-so was frozen in embarrassment, the guy smoothly snatched her passport from her wallet and started admiring her photo, saying she looked like an absolute cutie. Burning with shame, she started hitting him, demanding her documents back. Since she was much shorter than him, she had to stand on her tiptoes. Suddenly, she lost her balance and felt herself about to fall straight to the floor. But in the next second, Kang Si-hwa's arms wrapped around her and pulled her tightly against him. Being in his arms, she felt how warm he was and how strong his arms were. Her heart started pounding so hard she was sure he could feel it against his chest. She apologized, thinking he'd let her go, but instead he held her even tighter and buried his face in her neck. She didn't dare move, afraid to break the moment. But just as suddenly, he let her go and bent down to pick up her fallen wallet, asking if her ankle was okay. He apologized and said he'd taken the joke too far. But then Eun-so suddenly asked how tall he was, and he casually replied, 6'4", though he wasn't sure why she asked. Instead of answering, she yanked herself out of his arms, snapped that it was his fault she almost fell and that his height was annoying, then ran out of the cafe, leaving the confused guy behind. Si-hwa watched her leave with a soft grin, enjoying how flustered she got when he was close. Her wallet was still in his hand. A couple of days later, Eun-so got a message from her mom asking her to bring a forgotten bag to her workplace. Eun-so left the bag at the reception and was about to leave when she suddenly saw Ji-hyun. She didn't bother him since he was clearly in a hurry, but she wondered what he was doing at the hospital. Was he sick? Later that evening, she saw Ji-hyun again, this time with a group of guys who clearly didn't look too friendly. They looked like the same upperclassmen he'd almost gotten into a fight with that night. She hoped he'd be okay, but couldn't understand why he tolerated being treated like that. From what she knew, he wasn't a bad guy. After all, he was friends with Haerang. Just as that thought crossed her mind, one of the guys punched Ji-hyun in the face. The girl screamed at the top of her lungs for them to stop. Because of traffic, she couldn't cross the street right away, and the guys managed to run off. Meanwhile, Ji-hyun just wiped his lip with the back of his hand. Then he heard a familiar voice and turned his head toward her. Eun-so looked scared and worried. She noticed the blood on his lip and asked if he was okay. Instinctively, she cupped his face in her hands, asked if he'd bitten his tongue, and said she needed to check. But she quickly pulled away, apologizing. She shouldn't just grab someone's face like that. Suddenly, an old memory flashed through his mind. His grandfather smiling and telling him not to clench his jaw too tightly or his teeth would hurt later. The guy gave a soft smile and suddenly asked her to buy him a drink. Seeing Eun-so hesitate, he turned around and told her to just forget it, ready to leave, but she called after him to wait. She didn't know what exactly had happened to him, but decided she couldn't just walk away, so she suggested grabbing a beer. Soon, they were in a store, and Eun-so had picked out a pile of snacks. When the cashier asked if they should put everything on one bill, she thought maybe she'd overdone it, but Ji-hyun suddenly told the cashier to put everything on one check and paid for it. Eun-so reminded him that he was the one who asked her to treat him, so why was he paying? He just said he wanted to treat her. Soon, they were sitting on a bench by the river. Eun-so felt really awkward. This was the exact spot where she'd kissed Si-hwa for the first time. Of all places, why did Ji-hyun have to choose this one? He sat there quietly, staring at his beer can, and she thought maybe he just wanted to be alone. She asked if he wanted her to leave, but he said he actually wanted to sit with her. Then, out of nowhere, she asked if he was dating Haerang. The question made him choke on his beer. Eun-so had noticed how close the two of them were. Flustered, he quickly said they weren't like that at all. Nervous but curious, she asked why those upperclassmen were picking on him. That's when Ji-hyun remembered their recent fight. Those guys were pissed because he'd re-enrolled at the university. How dare he show his face again? He remembered his grandfather apologizing to his teacher. Even though the fight had been between kids, they could have called a school violence committee. His grandfather had done everything to keep him from being expelled completely, because it was his mom's and grandma's dream that he finish college. The guy took a sip of beer and told Eun-so it didn't matter anyway, which only irritated her more. Why did he even invite her if he didn't want to talk? Suddenly, her phone rang. She answered immediately. It was Si-hwa. His classes had ended, and he asked if she wanted to head home together, and where she was. When she told him she was at the riverfront, he laughed loudly over the phone, saying he remembered that place. It was where they'd kissed. Eun-so instantly hung up and took a big gulp of beer. God, this guy has zero filter. Her body was trembling with nerves, and her cheeks flushed red, but Ji-hyun misread it and said she must get drunk easily. The girl pressed her palm against her burning cheek and muttered that it wasn't the alcohol. Just seconds later, Kang Si-hwa appeared at the riverbank, waving cheerfully when he saw her. He was about to ask what she was doing there, but froze mid-sentence. Because right next to Eun-so, Ji-hyun was sitting like nothing happened, just calmly looking at the guy. Si-hwa's expression darkened immediately, and he asked if she'd been drinking. She didn't deny it and just asked what was wrong with that. Ji-hyun stood up, thanked her for everything she'd done for him, and said it was time for him to go. Honestly, she wasn't sure what exactly he was thanking her for, but she politely said goodbye. Meanwhile, what really interested Si-hwa was how the two of them ended up here together. Eun-so was about to explain how she'd caught Ji-hyun in the middle of a fight with some upperclassmen, but then decided it wouldn't be right to talk about something like that. So she just said she'd run into him by accident after bringing her mom some spare clothes. And why did he show up here? Si-hwa sighed strangely and said he'd already told her on the phone. He just wanted to go home with her. Then he flashed a bright smile as if nothing was bothering him, and added that there was something he wanted to do together with her at home. He remembered how, years ago, he and his mom had gone to pick out a birthday present for Eun-so. He had fallen in love with the delicate little necklace. He'd known Eun-so better than anyone and was sure she'd be thrilled with the gift. When he handed her the little box, her eyes lit up. It was the very pendant she'd wanted for so long. Even though she pretended otherwise, he knew she liked sparkly little things like that. Now, Si-hwa was standing in a jewelry store again, picking out another present for her. His eyes landed on a beautiful, elegant pendant, just Eun-so's style. He was convinced that was why she was in love with him. He called her to ask where she was and was a little surprised to hear she was at the riverfront. To tease her, he said he remembered that place. After all, that's where they'd kissed. The next moment, she hung up on him, and he thought she was such a little coward. And then he saw it, Eun-so drinking with Ji-hyun. Right now, Eun-so's eyes were puffy and red. They decided to stay up all night and watch a movie, which turned out to be incredibly boring. While Si-hwa nearly dozed off on her shoulder, Eun-so was tense to the point of shaking from how close he was. At some point, his calmness drove her so crazy that she shoved him away, angry and thinking he didn't even see her as a woman. In the end, she reached for the remote, saying they should just go to bed. But his hand shot out, grabbing hers. He took her hand in his, lacing their fingers together, and asked her to stay with him a little longer. Eun-so sat on the couch, holding his hand, feeling his soft hair brush against her cheek. His head rested on her shoulder as he breathed evenly. She wondered how he could be so calm in this situation, while her heart was pounding like crazy and her palms were sweating. Was she really the only one feeling this way? She thought, am I the only one who actually in love? Lately, Si-hwa had been acting strangely. Something between them really had changed. She brushed her fingers through the hair on his forehead and quietly muttered that he really annoyed her. Half asleep, he mumbled and asked how long he'd been annoying her. Blushing furiously, Eun-so answered, a long time. It seemed like he was asleep, but still responding to her in that half-dreaming state. Then he quietly asked, since when? She didn't know what to say. Lately, he'd been prying like this a lot. Or maybe she was just imagining things. She glanced at their intertwined hands and thought, maybe there was hope. So she suddenly said he was always acting weird, probably without even realizing it. The next moment, Si-hwa's face was incredibly close to hers. He was looking at her seriously, as if he was about to kiss her. But Eun-so decided they couldn't make the same mistake again, and burning with embarrassment, she immediately pulled away from him. She couldn't believe he wasn't actually asleep. He'd heard and understood everything. There wasn't a trace of drowsiness on Si-hwa's face. He smiled and asked if she really didn't like what he'd said. Eun-so blushed all the way to her hairline. Why was he asking her questions like that, watching her every reaction? Could it be that this guy actually had feelings for her? She couldn't meet his gaze and asked why he'd done that. When he softly asked why she thought he acted that way, she got annoyed again and asked why he always talked like that. The next moment, he lifted her hand, still holding it, and gently stroked her fingers. Then he apologized, saying everything had come out wrong. The nervousness in his eyes was unmistakable. His cheeks flushed red, and finally, he confessed that he was in love with Eun-so and asked her to date him. For a split second, she thought she was dreaming or had misheard. Did Si-hwa really just confess to her? It felt like the air had left her lungs. He was staring at her, not blinking, still holding her hand tightly. He repeated that he loved her, but Eun-so covered his mouth with her hands, not letting him say another word. A bitter smile spread across her face, and she asked if this was happening again. Was this another mistake, Baos, or was he just messing with her? Si-hwa remembered the few times he'd let his feelings slip, and how it always ended like some kind of misunderstanding. Eun-so quickly stood up and said she'd had enough for the night. But Si-hwa shouted that this time, it was different, begging her to wait. She turned to him with eyes brimming with tears and asked, what am I to you? Did you really think I was that easy? Her words made him freeze, completely stunned. He didn't know what to say. Eun-so took his silence as an answer. She gave a bitter smile and said he wasn't even going to try to explain himself. She walked out, leaving him standing in the middle of the room. When he finally gathered the courage and decided to knock on her door to talk, he froze the moment he heard Eun-so crying inside. Eun-so was curled up in a ball on her bed, wrapped tightly in her blanket, sobbing bitterly. The next morning, she woke up with swollen eyes, thinking about what a jerk Kang Si-hwa was. She quickly washed up and tied her hair into a ponytail when her eyes caught the perfume bottle he'd recently given her. The innocent little bottle ended up in the trash because she didn't want to see anything that reminded her of Si-hwa. When she stepped out of her room, she wasn't surprised to see him there. She walked past him as if he didn't exist, not giving him a chance to speak. Even though she promised herself she'd ignore him, she froze when she heard Si-hwa quietly whisper, "I'm sorry." The next second, he wrapped his arms around her from behind and, leaning closer, apologized again. He confessed that he truly meant every word he'd said. She heard his love confession again. This time it sounded more sincere. Si-hwa assured her it wasn't a mistake or a joke. He said that if she thought he wasn't good enough, he was willing to try harder. He asked her to take his words seriously and think about giving him a chance. His hand tightened around hers, but Eun-so still couldn't bring herself to believe it. She was scared to trust him again. As much as she wanted to see his face, she didn't turn around. She simply said they'd talk later. But now Si-hwa knew he couldn't let her slip away so easily. He planned to prove his love through every word and action. So he caught up to her, turned her around, hugged her tightly, and whispered softly that they would see each other later. His voice echoed in her ears. He thanked her. His warm breath near her ear, the familiar scent of his perfume, the heat of his touch. All of it felt so painfully familiar and loved, yet irritating at the same time. In the end, Eun-so melted in his arms and thought about how much she hated how easily she gave in to him. During class, she couldn't focus at all, replaying last night and this morning in her head. And then, Si-hwa texted her to ask when her class would end. She definitely couldn't face him right now, so she decided to run off and asked Hae-rang to come with her. But her friend looked strangely giddy, and Eun-so already knew that expression. It was Hae-rang's in love like a fool face. Walking toward them with a bright smile and waving cheerfully was Kang Si-hwa, calling out to her. And right behind him was the object of Hae-rang's affection, Yuan. As soon as they got closer, Si-hwa said he thought it'd be nice for everyone to have lunch together and get to know each other better. Hae-rang eagerly agreed. This was her chance to spend time with Yuan. Meanwhile, Si-hwa was trying to mouth something to Eun-so. She wasn't great at reading lips, but she managed to catch that he was saying something about buying her waffles. What the heck was he talking about? Then he leaned close to her ear and softly asked her not to be mad at him. That made her remember their school days. Si-hwa used to ask her not to be mad whenever she wanted to be alone. She'd tell him to go away and leave her alone, but he'd always reply that he wasn't going anywhere. Even when it wasn't his fault, he'd still apologize, worry about her, and gently ask her not to be upset. And now, standing in front of her with the same sincere expression, he asked her not to be mad again. When Yuan suddenly asked where they were going, Eun-so decided to mess with Si-hwa a little. She announced they'd go to a really nice place, and Si-hwa was paying. Hae-rang got excited and said she'd invite Ji-hyun too. It didn't seem to faze Si-hwa, but for a brief second, Eun-so thought she saw something flicker in his expression. But then, like always, he smiled and asked what she wanted to eat. Soon they were all sitting at a restaurant, enjoying a lively lunch together. Hae-rang found out Yuan was a year older, but he said they could speak informally. She was sitting between him and Ji-hyun, but all her attention was on Yuan. She cheerfully suggested they all get some beer. That's when Eun-so realized what a weird group they were. Everyone seemed to have feelings for someone or some kind of unspoken tension. Si-hwa, on the other hand, looked perfectly at ease, smiling and keeping his eyes on Eun-so. Feeling awkward, she decided to start some kind of conversation and asked what they'd be doing at tomorrow's training. Hae-rang replied that they usually just chose based on their mood, but Yuan said that wasn't very productive and that they should plan their training based on their goals. The group got caught up in a lively discussion about making a proper training schedule, and Eun-so realized the vibe actually wasn't that bad. Suddenly, she felt Si-hwa gently brush his finger against her hand as if trying to get her attention. She blushed and, without turning toward him, asked what he wanted. He leaned back with a smile and said he just wanted to know what she was thinking about. She grumbled that it was nothing special. Ji-hyun quietly observed everything happening between them. Then Hae-rang suddenly asked her friend if he was going to the camp, and he said no. The moment Si-hwa heard camp, he immediately asked what they were talking about. Hae-rang asked, "Didn't Eun-so tell you?" She explained that this year, instead of their usual trip, they'd be going to camp, and right after that would be the final exams. She added that it would take place from Thursday to Saturday this week. Si-hwa was shocked and a little hurt. Why hadn't she told him? Eun-so shrugged it off and said it wasn't that important. Yuan quietly watched their interaction and saw with his own eyes that there were definitely feelings between them. Earlier, Si-hwa had told him he liked Eun-so and that he'd already confessed. He wanted Yuan to keep his distance from her. And now, Si-hwa openly asked in front of everyone why she hadn't thought about him, saying it'd be so lonely without her. And while Yuan only thought about their closeness, Haerang suddenly blurted out loud, "Wait, are you two dating?" Eun-so actually choked on her beer and spit it back into her glass. Blushing bright red, she blurted out, "No!" But Si-hwa, smiling and staring at her with that love-struck gaze, replied, "Not yet." She looked at this ridiculously handsome guy and the sly smile on his face. Not yet? How could he say something like that so casually? The girl stood up and said she needed to go to the restroom, and Haerang immediately said she'd go with her. As soon as the girls were gone, Ji-hyun slammed his empty glass on the table and asked Si-hwa how long he was planning to act like a spoiled little kid. Si-hwa just kept smiling and pretending not to get it, so he asked what Ji-hyun was even talking about. He caught Ji-hyun off guard and asked why he was acting like this. "Do you like Eun-so or something?" The guy quickly said no. Then Si-hwa looked him straight in the eyes and said, "Then you shouldn't care." Later that evening, on their way home, Si-hwa casually asked Eun-so if she and Ji-hyun were close friends since they studied in the same department. She answered that yeah, they were friends, but suddenly realized she'd never actually seen him in any of their classes. While Eun-so was lost in thought, Si-hwa quietly noted to himself that the two might be closer than he thought. The next day, Eun-so stopped by the university gym, where Haerang had scheduled the club's training, but no one was there yet. She wondered if she should go inside and wait. The next second, Ji-hyun suddenly appeared behind her and greeted her. They walked in together and decided to sit down and wait. For a while, they sat in awkward silence, and Eun-so felt like she should say something. Finally, she remembered and said she'd seen Ji-hyun last time at the hospital. He paused for a moment, then said he remembered that day. They'd had drinks together by the river afterward. Nervously, she said she'd actually seen him inside the hospital and wondered if he'd been sick. She worried she was overstepping, but Ji-hyun said his grandmother was staying in that hospital. She instantly felt even more awkward, talking about something so personal could have made him uncomfortable. She wanted to ask about those upperclassmen again, but didn't dare. Suddenly, Ji-hyun stood up and asked if she wanted to start first. He suggested they start with boxing and told her to hit with full force. He wanted her to let go of her fear and really swing. But Eun-so hesitated. The last time she only hit a punching bag. When he told her to imagine someone who pissed her off, Si-hwa's face immediately popped into her mind. She started throwing punches, feeling her anger surge and fade with every hit. Ji-hyun praised her and encouraged her not to hold back. To himself, he noted she was actually pretty good. Clearly, there was someone she wouldn't mind punching. But suddenly, Eun-so froze, realizing she might have gone too far. Ji-hyun didn't dodge in time, and she landed a solid punch right on his nose. And now it was bleeding. She panicked, ready to run for tissues, but he caught her hand and said it was fine, then casually wiped his nose with his hand. He grabbed a tissue himself and pressed it to his nose. She kept apologizing over and over, but he told her it was nothing and even complimented her punch. Eun-so couldn't calm down and suddenly reached out to check his face, wanting to make sure he was okay. But Ji-hyun instantly pulled back as if burned and repeated that he was fine. Eun-so felt awkward, like she'd crossed a line. She tried to change the subject, saying the gym was too hot, then pulled out her phone, but there were no new messages. Ji-hyun's eyes briefly wandered over her, and he noticed a bead of sweat slowly trickling down her neck. The next moment, Eun-so felt something touch her neck. Ji-hyun wiped the sweat from her skin with a tissue and said she probably didn't handle the heat very well. Realizing how forward that might have seemed, he quickly pulled his hand away and apologized. Eun-so hurried to say he was right, but she could feel the air between them grow tense and awkward. Neither of them knew what to say, so they just stood there in silence. Suddenly, a few guys grabbed Ji-hyun in a playful headlock, teasing him and asking if he'd brought a girl to the gym to impress her. He tried to explain that it wasn't like that and that Eun-so was Haerang's friend, but the guys just kept teasing him. Watching their playful banter, Eun-so realized Ji-hyun was actually just a regular guy. Not scary at all. It was just that those upperclassmen had been picking on him, and she'd met him at the wrong time. Suddenly, one of Ji-hyun's friends turned to Eun-so and asked what their relationship was. Maybe there was some mutual crush going on? But when Eun-so answered that she and Ji-hyun were friends, he seemed a bit taken aback, like he hadn't expected her to say that. One of the guys clapped him on the back and laughed, saying it didn't look like Ji-hyun saw her as just a friend. Eun-so watched their interaction. Those two had the kind of bond only really close friends or brothers have. A little while later, the club training ended, and Herring let out a satisfied sigh, saying she'd released all her stress. Eun-so, on the other hand, was completely out of breath, wondering how her friend could have that much energy. Was Herring even human? Finally, the girl said she was heading home to take a shower. Herring wished her a safe trip home. Meanwhile, Ji-hyun stepped out of the shower, towel drying his still damp hair. He was surprised to hear Eun-so had already left. Walking over to the window, he saw her making her way down the street. Herring noticed where he was looking and teasingly asked if he liked Eun-so. When she caught him blushing, she squealed in excitement, saying she knew it. But Ji-hyun, turning even redder, mumbled that she was talking nonsense. The next day, Eun-so got ready for their 3-day camp, and Si-hwa grabbed her bag, asking if she'd forgotten anything. Even though Eun-so insisted she could carry her own bag, he smiled and said he wanted to help her. She still didn't know how to react to his constant kindness and attention. When they finally arrived at the university, Si-hwa took her hand and wished her a good trip. All Eun-so could think about was his recent confession and whether he had really meant it. He waved at her and left. Later, sitting with her classmates, Eun-so couldn't take her eyes off her phone. His last message had just been a simple, "Have a safe trip," and he hadn't texted since. It was driving her crazy. One moment he couldn't leave her alone, the next he disappeared completely. His hot and cold behavior was making her mad. Haerang noticed her mood and asked what was wrong. Had something happened between her and Si-hwa? Eun-so said nothing, but deep down she knew that was exactly the problem. She decided to change the subject and asked why Ji-hyun hadn't joined them. Haerang hesitated, unsure how to explain it to her friend. But the moment everyone around heard Ji-hyun's name, they started whispering and asking who mentioned him. The girls looked at Eun-so with puzzled expressions, asking if she really didn't know anything about him. They explained that Ji-hyun was considered an outcast in their department because he once punched an upperclassman. From their conversations, Eun-so learned that Ji-hyun was a year older and had always had problems with a guy named Sang-yeon. They went to the same high school where Ji-hyun had bullied him. In reality, Sang-yeon had bullied Ji-hyun first, and only later did he start fighting back. When they ended up in the same department, Sang-yeon turned everyone against him, encouraging others to treat him with disrespect and ignore him. Eun-so thought back to Ji-hyun and realized he didn't seem like someone who'd bully anyone. A little later, she stood there, staring at her phone. She couldn't shake off how Si-hwa hadn't texted her, especially since he seemed so into her before. Just as that thought crossed her mind, her screen lit up with the name Kang Si-hwa. It was an incoming call. He asked how she was and said he hoped she hadn't caused any trouble yet. Then suddenly, he told her to guess where he was. Before she could reply, he said he was outside her building and asked her to come out. Eun-so ran to his car but noticed it was empty. Where had he gone? Suddenly, Si-hwa hugged her from behind, saying he wanted to surprise her and see her. His closeness made her blush again. His face was so close that she quickly told him to let go. To her surprise, he immediately did. Since when is he so obedient, she thought. She even wondered if she smelled sweaty. She had changed after practice and sprayed some freshener so she wouldn't smell like alcohol. But then Si-hwa caught her off guard again, this time pulling her tightly into his arms and burying his face in her neck. Her heart was racing with joy and nervous excitement, but all she could manage to say was that he was acting weird today. She couldn't understand why he was suddenly behaving like this. His arms tightened around her, pulling her even closer, and he softly complained that she hadn't texted him once today. It felt like she was in a dream. Her hands moved on their own. She wanted to hug him back just as tightly, but ended up just gripping his hoodie. Then she surprised him by saying he wasn't any better since she had been waiting for his message all day. Blushing, she buried her face in his shoulder. Si-hwa was caught off guard. Was she finally opening up to him? He immediately tilted his head to look at her and, like a little kid, asked if she really meant it. Too embarrassed to meet his gaze, Eun-so said she did, adding that lying was his thing, not hers. Warmth spread through his chest, and he gently pressed his forehead to hers. A soft smile appeared on his lips as he asked when he'd ever lied to her. Then his expression grew a little sad, but he kept looking into her eyes. His lips were so close that she could feel his breath on her skin. He repeated that he'd always been honest with her. So why didn't she believe him? Eun-so was mesmerized by his lips. The closeness between them was driving her crazy. Finally, she closed her eyes and leaned in, ready for him to kiss her. And Si-hwa wanted it too, so badly. Staring at her waiting lips, he wanted nothing more than to kiss her and never let her go. But in the next moment, he suddenly pulled back and suggested they sit and talk in the car. Eun-so was left flustered and even more confused. She'd been sure he was going to kiss her. Had she misread him again? Once inside the car, she started fanning her burning face, embarrassed. Meanwhile, Si-hwa stood frozen outside the passenger door, and she couldn't understand why he wasn't getting in. His face was flushed, his breathing uneven, and he silently told himself to get it together. When he finally sat down, Eun-so asked how he'd found this place. He said Hanen had told him. Eun-so immediately felt uneasy about how close those two were getting. She was afraid her friend might find out they were living together. But then, Si-hwa completely shocked her by saying he had already told Hanen. Eun-so froze in horror. What would people think of them now? Si-hwa gently reassured her, saying that since Hanen hadn't asked or said anything about it, it only meant she genuinely cared about her. Eun-so instantly pictured her sweet friend's face and thought how hard it must have been to know and pretend she didn't. She felt grateful. Meanwhile, leaning on the steering wheel with a heavy sigh, Si-hwa asked why she even had to go on this trip when they could have just trained at the university. Then, almost laughing at himself, he admitted it probably sounded pathetic. Eun-so didn't understand what exactly sounded pathetic. The trip? Her? But then he lifted his flushed face and explained, embarrassed, that he was the pathetic one. He couldn't even wait a few days and rushed to see her. He was worried she wouldn't like that. Eun-so was stunned. Was this really the same Si-hwa she knew? Why did he look so flustered? She lowered her gaze and quietly asked if he'd come again tomorrow to see her. Then, with a little more confidence, she said she wanted him to. Si-hwa stared at her in surprise. Her heart was pounding like crazy. His silence was driving her insane. Was she being too pushy? The next second, she felt his warm hand gently touch hers, their fingers slowly intertwining. Holding her hand in his, Si-hwa placed a soft kiss on her wrist. Without looking away, he asked, "What if I really do come tomorrow?" Their fingers intertwined tighter, and she softly asked if he really would. They sat there holding hands like a real couple. Si-hwa looked happy as he told her that if she was truly going to wait for him, then he'd definitely come. Eun-so blushed and said that tonight he came just because he missed her. His smile and the way he looked at her made her heart want to leap out of her chest. She didn't want this moment to end. Then, puffing out her cheeks shyly, she whispered that he was teasing her again, and that she'd be waiting. When it was finally time to say goodbye, Eun-so couldn't take her eyes off their intertwined hands. Standing by the car, she really didn't want to part with him. A question burned in her mind. Would Si-hwa keep his promise and come back? A part of her doubted it, but she didn't dare ask again. Her doubts were tearing her apart, so she suddenly blurted out if he'd really come just like he promised. But before he could even answer, she, red with embarrassment, yanked her hand away and ran off, yelling over her shoulder for him to forget what she'd just said. He stood there, stunned, watching her retreating figure and noticing how red her face and ears were. So that's it. She was waiting for him too. With a heavy exhale, he crouched down, thinking how crazy this was driving him. He shouldn't act like a clown around her. He wanted her to trust him. His heart was racing. He wanted to run after her, but he forced himself to be patient and keep it together. It was still too soon, he couldn't rush her. A little while later, after Eun-so told her story, Hanen screamed in excitement. Did someone just confess their love to her friend? She was overjoyed for Eun-so and begged her to share every detail. But if she wasn't ready, she'd understand. Either way, she was truly happy for her. Eun-so quietly looked at her friend and thought about how she'd always been there for her. Always cared, always respected her feelings, so she decided to trust her. She told her that Si-hwa had confessed to her a week ago. Hanen clapped her hands in delight, asking if that meant they were officially a couple now. But when Eun-so said no, Hanen asked why. They liked each other. Wasn't that obvious? Eun-so grew nervous, unsure how to explain it. She nervously fidgeted with her fingers and admitted she'd been in love with Si-hwa for a very long time. He'd always known but pretended not to, because her feelings were a burden to him. She said she'd always wanted to let go of those feelings so they could truly be friends, without all the awkwardness. But now that he'd confessed, she didn't know what to believe. What if he was just joking or playing around with her? He'd always teased her, and she'd always been dumb enough to believe him. Maybe he just thought she was easy and decided to use her. Hearing that, Hanen immediately told her not to even think like that. Eun-so remembered his face that night when he confessed to her. He looked so sincere. Covering her face with her hands, she admitted how nervous she'd been and how much she wanted to believe him. Seeing her friends struggle, Haring said she truly believed Si-hwa loved her. She'd always sensed something special between them. They had always seemed like special friends, but lately, something between them had changed. Their bond had deepened. It was clear they were more than just friends now. "Isn't it more painful to sit here and doubt everything?" Haring asked. "Wouldn't it be better to give him a chance?" Is there something else bothering you?" Eun-so then softly asked. "What if we break up and can't even be friends anymore?" She couldn't bear that thought. Haring was surprised at how far ahead her friend was looking. Then she smiled and said, "If that's the only problem, then just don't break up." Eun-so stared at her, surprised by how simple she made it sound. But after their talk, Eun-so felt lighter. The situation didn't seem so terrifying anymore. Her friend encouraged her again, promising everything would be fine, then suggested they head back to the room. As they walked, Eun-so suddenly asked if the rumors about Ji-hyun were true, about him bullying guys in school and beat Sang-haeon up. Haerang immediately turned around and told her it wasn't true at all, that in fact Ji-hyun was the real victim. She took Eun-so's hands in hers and said she couldn't share the details because it wasn't her story to tell, but Ji-hyun was not a bad person. Otherwise, she wouldn't be friends with him. She asked Eun-so to trust her, and Eun-so said she did. She'd just been surprised. Still, she couldn't stop wondering why such rumors had spread in the first place. Ji-hyun didn't seem like the type at all, and she worried about what might have happened to him. The next evening, as Eun-so stood lost in thought, she felt a warm hand brush against her cheek. In front of her stood Si-hwa, smiling a little shyly as he asked what she was thinking about so deeply. He gently held her face in his hands, pressed his forehead against hers again, just inches from her lips, and asked if she was tired from practice and wanted to go home. Eun-so inhaled his scent. She still couldn't believe he had really come. She leaned into him, hiding her burning face against his shoulder, and quietly admitted she was just happy to be with him right now. Then her arms wrapped around him, hugging him tightly. She didn't know if it was okay to do this, but right now it was exactly what she wanted. To her surprise, Si-hwa kissed the top of her head and softly said that he was also happy he came to see her and was right here with her. Realizing he had just kissed her, the girl blushed and nervously asked why he did that. She felt awkward. She hadn't even washed her hair yet, and he might not like the way she smelled. But that only amused Si-hwa. He leaned closer, trying to kiss her again, teasing that he hadn't even noticed. The girl kept playfully resisting while he laughed sincerely, enjoying every second of it. A few days later, Eun-so sat in a cafe, feeling down. She couldn't understand when she had changed so much. Just 15 minutes earlier, she had reached for the bathroom door handle, but froze, realizing Si-hwa was inside taking a shower. She stopped in place, realizing how awkward it would have been if she had just walked in on him like that. Or maybe it wouldn't have been that bad. A vivid image of Si-hwa standing naked under the shower appeared in her mind. Hot water streamed down his body. Horrified by her own thoughts, she rushed out of the house. What had gotten into her? Where did the sudden urge to open the door come from? Her imagination painted what could have happened next. In her mind, he wouldn't have even been upset if she had walked in. Stirring her iced coffee furiously, she tried to cool herself down. Maybe he had done it on purpose, to tempt her. That would be just like him. Suddenly, she froze, spotting a familiar face through the cafe window. It was Ji-hyun. She waved to him to say hello, but stopped in confusion when he just walked past without reacting. The girl felt awkward. Had she done something wrong? But the next second, Ji-hyun came inside the cafe and sat down next to her, greeting her and explaining that he was on his way home from work. Then he asked what she was doing there. Eun-so answered that she just came to cool down because the cafe had good air conditioning. She couldn't exactly say she'd run away from home because of Kang Si-hwa. She asked where he worked and was surprised to hear he had a part-time job as a cashier at a movie theater. It didn't seem like something that suited his image at all. As if reading her thoughts, he said she probably thought it didn't fit him. But she wasn't the first. Everyone said that. Noticing her intense gaze, he asked what was wrong. Eun-so quickly said it was nothing, but her mind was still full of thoughts about him being a victim of bullying. He really didn't seem like a bad guy. Why did she keep thinking about that? Suddenly, he stood up and asked if she wanted to grab a bite together. Even though it was still early, he was hungry and suggested they eat. Eun-so agreed. After they finished their meal, he paid the bill. Eun-so felt awkward and offered to transfer him money, but he refused. So she smiled and promised to treat him to something at their next practice. Ji-hyun remembered how Haerang had told him at the gym that Eun-so had learned about his past. A hint of sadness flickered in his eyes. He thought he might not be able to keep going to the club anymore. She'd probably feel uncomfortable being around him. But right now, she looked at him as usual and just said she felt awkward that he'd paid. She reminded him they'd be seeing each other often anyway, so she'd definitely treat him next time. The guy froze, unsure if he'd heard her right. Did that mean she wasn't disgusted by him? Eun-so stiffened too, feeling even more awkward. Had she said something wrong? Why was he looking at her like that? Ji-hyun suddenly let out a quiet laugh, thinking how she was acting like her usual self, and that made him genuinely happy. Eun-so was surprised by his reaction. Then he turned and cheerfully said he agreed. She could treat him next time at practice. They headed toward the subway, chatting along the way, and found out they were going to the same station. When they got off at their stop, Eun-so glanced back and was surprised to see him go down the stairs again. But he'd said this was his stop. Did that mean he just rode along to walk her home? Whatever the reason, she decided he definitely couldn't be a bad person. She called out to him, waved goodbye, and smiled warmly. Ji-hyun gave her a small, rare smile in return, and then they went their separate ways. Soon, it was time for another club practice. Haerang, as usual, wouldn't leave Yuan's side, complaining about how hot it was today. Eun-so took the chance and offered to go buy drinks for everyone, but no one wanted any. She looked at Ji-hyun, remembering her promise, and asked if he was sure he didn't want something to drink. He seemed to remember her promise too, and was amused by how much she cared about it. Smiling softly, he said no. Si-hwa, who had been watching them closely, noticed that something was definitely going on between the two of them. Then he stood up, stretched out his hand to her, and said he wanted a drink, suggesting they go buy something together. But suddenly, Ji-hyun stood up too and said he'd changed his mind and wanted a drink as well. Eun-so felt a strange tension between the two of them. Si-hwa kept his hand out and invited her again. She stood up and turned to ask Ji-hyun what he wanted, but he said he'd go with them. Haerang was so absorbed in Yuan that she didn't hear or notice anything, so the others decided to leave the two alone for a while. When they reached the vending machine, Eun-so asked Ji-hyun what he wanted. He said he'd like a Coke. When she turned to ask Si-hwa, he leaned against the machine and stared at her. Now he was sure. Something had happened between these two. Jealousy flared inside him. Like an offended cat, he raised his chin and said he didn't want anything after all. The girl was surprised and pointed out that he had suggested getting drinks in the first place. What had changed now? While they were talking, Ji-hyun grabbed a couple of cans from the machine and handed one to her, thanking her. They started chatting about what drinks they liked, while Si-hwa silently fumed, watching the easy chemistry between them. Suddenly, he stepped between them with a smile and said that watching her drink made him want one too. The girl offered to buy him one too, but Si-hwa casually threw his arm around her shoulders, grabbed her can, and said there was no need for that. He added that he'd just take a sip from hers. Flustered, the girl let him drink from her can. Meanwhile, Ji-hyun quietly watched her from the side. A little later, Eun-so was sitting with Haerang. Her friend asked if she and Si-hwa had finally figured out what they were to each other now. Eun-so started recalling everything that had happened since his confession. They'd hugged. Si-hwa had told her he loved her, and even kissed her on the top of her head. Did that mean they were already a couple? Then suddenly she remembered he'd asked her a question she still hadn't answered. What should she have said to him? Her cheeks burned with embarrassment as she thought about confessing and finally agreeing to date him. Haerang told her not to drag it out and cheerfully added that there was no hot water at home tonight, so they'd have to take cold showers, which didn't exactly thrill Eun-so, but she had no choice. Later that evening, the girls went out for dinner and drinks, but Eun-so started feeling unwell. She was shivering. She decided to head home early and get some rest. Her steps toward the subway were heavy, her head foggy. She just wanted to get home and crawl into bed. Her head suddenly began spinning so badly she wasn't sure she'd make it home. She wasn't even sure if she had any medicine there. Suddenly, she bumped into someone and started apologizing, but it turned out to be Kang Si-hwa. He grabbed her shoulders, worried, and asked if she was okay. Eun-so looked at him as if through a haze. The only thing she could focus on was his lips. He grew more anxious and scolded her. If she'd felt sick, she should have told him so he could meet her. While he kept asking about how she felt, Eun-so couldn't stop wondering why he was fussing so much. His palms were cooled against her cheeks, and it felt so soothing that she actually closed her eyes for a moment. Eun-so blinked, and suddenly she was in a car, listening to Si-hwa talking to her mom, telling her that Eun-so seemed sick but that he'd take care of her. Her eyes slowly closed, and a childhood memory came back to her. She was little, peeking into Si-hwa's room to tell him it had started snowing outside. The boy was lying in bed, sick, and his mom wouldn't let him get up. The girl reached out her hand to check his forehead. It really was a little warm. Suddenly, Si-hwa did the same to her, checking her forehead, and said that he thought hers felt even hotter. He told her to be careful and not stay outside too long or she might catch a cold, then settled back in bed, ready to fall asleep. Eun-so thought she shouldn't have come and, after wishing him rest, started to leave. But the boy caught her hand and asked where she was going. He pulled her toward his bed and asked her to stay with him. He'd been bored all day alone. Smiling at her, he said she should nap too and promised to wake her up by dinner. But she pouted and asked why she had to sleep with him. She could nap at home. Si-hwa covered her eyes with his hand and said if she'd caught a cold too, she should rest. And then he promised they'd eat her favorite chocolate ice cream together afterward. And then the girl came back to her senses. She slowly realized she was in her own room, in her bed, with a cold compress on her forehead. She then noticed Si-hwa sleeping in a chair by her bed. Surprised, she wondered if this was just a dream. A second later, hearing her move, he opened his eyes, looked at her anxiously, and asked if she was awake. He rushed over, leaning closer, placing his hand on her forehead. His voice was full of concern as he asked how she was feeling. It seemed like the fever was still there. Eun-so shot up in bed and asked what was going on and what time it was. He glanced at his phone and calmly said it was almost midnight. Hearing that, she couldn't believe she'd slept that long. Si-hwa asked if she felt up to eating some porridge with her medicine, or if she just wanted to take the medicine. He explained that judging by her symptoms, it was probably a cold and that he had already told her mom. Eun-so remembered overhearing part of their conversation in the car and said he shouldn't have bothered her mom. She took the pill from his hand and drank some water, wondering how she'd even ended up in her room. Si-hwa explained that since she'd told him to eat alone, he'd just been wandering around feeling lonely, when suddenly he saw someone collapse. Good thing he noticed it was her. Taking the empty cup from her hand, he set it down and told her she always insisted she was fine. But she needed to tell him when something like this happened. She apologized again. She'd never seen him look so drained and upset. Was he really that worried about her? Blushing, Si-hwa went back to the chair and said he wasn't mad at her, just really worried. He'd texted her, but when she didn't answer, he called Hanen. She told him they had split up about 15 minutes earlier and Eun-so should have been nearby. He got even more anxious when Hanen mentioned Eun-so hadn't been feeling well, which was why she left early. Then he finally spotted her, barely able to walk, leaning against a streetlight. Si-hwa remembered their school days. He'd often sit quietly, lost in his own thoughts, watching the world go by. Eun-so would stand in front of him, hands on her hips, and ask why he was always daydreaming and skipping PE. He held out his hands and asked what would happen to his precious hands if he got hurt. After all, he was a special person. Then suddenly, he asked about her leg. He'd noticed how badly she'd fallen and how dirty her uniform had gotten. The girl blushed, quickly brushing the dirt off herself, saying a fall like that was nothing. But when Si-hwa suggested going to the nurse's office, she agreed. She turned around and asked him not to tell her mom she had fallen. Then she went back to her friends, clearly limping. The boy watched her walk away, wondering why she always tried to endure everything alone. And now she was doing the same thing again. Why hadn't she told him she wasn't feeling well? He had been so worried about her. He grew flustered, apologized for saying that, and told Eun-so to just lie down and rest. And at that moment, she suddenly realized it wasn't embarrassment. He was genuinely upset about what had happened. Si-hwa gently caught her by the shoulders and told her to lie back down. He tucked the blanket around her, taking care of her as if she were a little kid, then suddenly mentioned he'd bought her favorite ice cream. Noticing the strange look on her face, he asked what was wrong. Eun-so, flustered and blushing, asked if he remembered something similar happening before. When he didn't respond right away, she said it was fine if he didn't remember. It had just come to her in a dream. But then Si-hwa interrupted her and said he did remember. Every time she got sick, she'd always insist she was fine, pretending nothing was wrong so her mom wouldn't worry. Eun-so's eyes widened in surprise. She sat up again, asking how he knew about that. Si-hwa calmly grabbed the blanket again, leaning closer as he tried to cover her. In a soft voice, he asked how he couldn't know. After all, she hadn't changed at all since then. She stared at him in confusion, unable to figure out if Si-hwa had changed or stayed the same. Sometimes it felt like nothing had changed, and other times like she didn't know him at all. She heard a quiet chuckle from him and asked what was so funny. He said it was just because he felt happy. Seeing Eun-seo's annoyed expression, he turned the corners of his lips downward and said if she didn't like it, he'd stop laughing, and that now she could see he was sad. Suddenly, he asked why she kept avoiding his eyes and told her to look at him. He leaned in close and said he wasn't laughing anymore. Eun-seo grumbled, saying he was still laughing at her. Si-hwa took her hands in his, letting out a shaky breath. Looking down at her palms in his, he confessed that he was crazy about her laughter and wanted her to always smile because of him. Eun-seo held her breath. Her heart was racing again, and she couldn't tell if it was the fever or her nerves. Meanwhile, Si-hwa looked into her eyes with the same shy expression and admitted he wanted her to smile only for him. She looked at him, their hands still intertwined, and it felt like the perfect moment to finally give him her answer. But for some reason, all her thoughts flew away, and her tongue felt tied. She felt his hand slowly slide up toward her face. Si-hwa rested his forehead against hers again, whispering softly that her face was burning red. She looked at his faint smile, wondering why he wasn't feeling the same intensity she was. To her, despite the situation, he looked so calm, as if everything were just normal for him. Meanwhile, every touch of his made her heart race out of control, and she couldn't stop overthinking. She suddenly pulled back a little and whispered that it hurt. It made her feel sad. Slowly, she reached up to touch his face and said she wished just once he'd be as surprised and breathless as she was. The next second, she shocked him, pulling him close and kissing him, pouring everything she had into that moment. Si-hwa was caught off guard but didn't immediately give in. He didn't want things to happen like this. Feeling his hesitation, she pulled away, lowered her head, and mumbled an apology, saying she'd made a mistake. But then she felt his fingers gently lift her chin. Her words shattered his heart, and he asked if she really thought that was a mistake. Eun-seo blushed. She shouldn't have done that. She should have given him her answer first. But suddenly, Si-hwa cupped her face with both hands, pulled her in, and kissed her. This time, he poured all his feelings into it. She felt the sincerity in his kiss, her eyes slowly closing as she melted into the moment. When he pulled away for just a second, he whispered, asking how she could say something like that. Looking at her with hazy eyes, he told her that for him, it had never been a mistake. Then he gently brushed his nose against hers, silently asking for permission to continue. Eun-seo leaned in, and their lips met again in a tender kiss, this time without any hesitation or unspoken doubts. They were so lost in each other, they didn't notice the message that popped up on Eun-seo's phone. Ji-hyun had texted her, wondering what she was doing. But after waiting without a reply, he decided he probably shouldn't have texted her at all. But it was already too late to change anything. He reached his house. Unlocking the door, he called out that he was home, but the lights were off. That was strange. And then he saw the one who was supposed to be waiting for him lying unconscious on the floor. Meanwhile, the sound of heavy breathing filled Eun-seo's room. They kept kissing, pressing closer to each other. Si-hwa took her hand and gently placed it behind his neck so she'd hold him tighter. As he softly stroked her, Eun-seo wrapped her arms around his shoulders, pulling him down with her. She was so lost in the moment that everything else faded away. Then she suddenly pulled back, breathing hard, her cheeks burning red, and tried to remind him that she had a cold and he could catch it. But Si-hwa pulled her back into another kiss, murmuring that he didn't care. He felt her soft, warm body beneath his hands and lowered his lips to her neck, leaving a gentle bite. Then he kissed the same spot, making her let out a shaky, breathy sigh. Eun-seo tangled her fingers in his soft hair, pulling him closer again. But then suddenly he froze. He lowered his head to her shoulder, trying to catch his breath. In that moment, Eun-seo had another realization. She could feel how fast and hard his heart was beating, pounding against her chest. She almost asked if he was okay, but Si-hwa suddenly pushed himself up from the bed. Then he stood, gently pulled the blanket over the confused girl, and said it was time for her to sleep. They'd see each other tomorrow. Eun-seo couldn't understand why he'd suddenly stopped like that. She just sat there, staring at him in surprise. Before closing the door behind him, he told her softly to sleep well. She kept sitting in confusion. Was that really it? Meanwhile, Si-hwa went to the bathroom, turned on the cold water, and leaned over the sink. The image of Eun-seo lying beneath him, looking up at him with those big eyes, was still burning in his mind. He splashed cold water on his face and lowered his head. He needed to calm himself down, fast. It had all started back in his childhood, with a single link on social media. When he opened it, he saw an account dedicated entirely to him, full of only his photos. That day he had a cold lying in bed, not understanding what it was or who had sent it. Maybe it was their housekeeper or the driver. They were always around him. Then a worried Eun-seo came to check on him. He'd been so scared of being alone that he made up an excuse so she could stay with him. With her by his side, he felt calm and safe because he trusted her completely. Time passed, and the boy kept getting links to posts about him. There was one for his elementary school graduation, and another for his first day of middle school. People left comments. It bothered Si-hwa, but he told himself at least it wasn't hurting anyone. One day, while skipping PE class, he thought about how telling his parents would only cause trouble, so it was better to stay quiet. At that moment, he saw Eun-so trip and fall. She hit her nose pretty hard, but when she saw him looking, she blushed, got up, and pretended nothing happened. He chuckled to himself, watching her, thinking how cute and silly she was. Then he blocked yet another sender. But no matter how many accounts he blocked, new ones kept popping up. One day, while he and Eun-so were riding home in the car, a new notification popped up. He expected to see another link with his photo, but this time it was different. What he saw made him freeze. This time it was a photo of his father in another woman's arms. Seeing the worried look on his face, Eun-so asked what was wrong. Had he seen something bad? But the boy pulled himself together, smiled, and said it was her birthday and that his mom had been baking a cake for her since morning. But in his head, the same question pounded over and over. What was that photo? Then Eun-so unexpectedly confessed her feelings to him, but he pretended not to understand, and she turned it into a joke. That photo was the beginning of it all. From then on, he dreaded every new notification. Day after day, he received more and more personal photos of his father. It tore him apart and left him restless until he finally decided to talk to his mom about it. One day, his mom came in with a bouquet of yellow roses, wanting to put them in his room. He handed her his phone, saying he needed to show her something. He'd regret that day forever. He should never have said anything. The decision to go study abroad was sudden. He didn't fully understand everything, but he desperately wanted to run away. The only thing he regretted was not saying goodbye to Eun-so. She was probably furious with him. But at the time, all that mattered to him was his mom. He watched her slowly burn out like a match. She was suffering. His father had left, promising he'd return once he took care of things. His mother slowly lost her mind, throwing fits, screaming, sinking deeper into rage. All Si-hwa could think while watching her was how badly he wanted her to get better and come back to him. But with each passing day, her behavior grew more unhinged. Until one day, Si-hwa snapped and ran. He desperately wanted to escape from that nightmare. And then a sharp slap across his face and those piercing words. It was his fault his mother died. Si-hwa drowned in his despair and guilt. It was his fault that his mother did what she did. If he hadn't run away from her, if he hadn't shown her those photos in the first place, none of it would have happened. And right in that moment, when the guy was drifting in endless darkness, where there was nothing to hold on to and no one to reach out a hand, Eun-so appeared and wrapped her arms around him. He didn't know if she'd ever thought about him again, but he thought about her all the time. Honestly, Si-hwa believed she had forgotten him. So when he saw how desperately she tried to comfort him, he realized his Eun-so had never really gone anywhere. He gave in to the moment and kissed her, because he understood the Eun-so who loved him was still right there. In that instant, he felt wild with happiness, and he took her presence for granted. Later, when the girl murmured soft apologies in her sleep, he felt so at peace just lying beside her. He didn't need her apologies or her pity. All he wanted was for her to keep loving him. But the first time he said it out loud, he suddenly realized he had fallen for her completely and irreversibly, and had been in love all these years. Now, trying to clear his head, Si-hwa thought about how dangerous everything between them had become. Morning came, and Eun-so finally saw the message Ji-hyun had sent her last night. Just as she was about to reply, she heard a knock on the door. Si-hwa smiled and asked if she was heading to class. It was already 9:20. The girl dashed out of the room and straight for the door. She really didn't want to face him first thing in the morning. Si-hwa offered to go with her, but Eun-so pretended not to hear, saying she was in a rush and couldn't believe how late it already was. Her hand was already on the doorknob when she heard his voice asking how she was feeling. He slowly walked up behind her, and Eun-so stammered that she felt fine, and that the medicine he gave her yesterday really helped. But the moment yesterday was mentioned, flashes of their kiss came flooding back into her mind. She felt awkward meeting his gaze after what happened, but part of her wondered if he felt just as flustered. Suddenly, Si-hwa wrapped his arms around her and leaned close to her face, asking why she wouldn't look at him. He'd been waiting for her to look his way. Wasn't she happy to see him? Eun-so flinched at his closeness and didn't know what to say. What if he said last night was just a joke? But in the next second, Si-hwa gently placed his hand over hers and softly kissed the corner of her lips. He expected her to kiss him back, but when he opened his eyes, he saw Eun-so's flushed, nervous face. She was even trembling a little. Seeing her anxiety, Si-hwa carefully held her hand, trying to calm her down, and asked what she wanted for lunch. Still in his arms, the girl asked if he'd planned to have lunch with her. He grinned and asked, "Did you really think now that we're dating we'd eat separately?" He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her close, a mischievous smile spreading across his face. He told her that today was their first day. After all, she was the one who kissed him yesterday. Then he rested his chin on her shoulder, giving her a wide-eyed, innocent look. He looked just like a soft, adorable kitten and asked if she didn't want to date him. His eyes sparkled and Eun-so couldn't resist his charm. She felt awkward and out of her depth, but she said it wasn't like that at all. Si-hwa left a light kiss on her cheek. He kept teasing her with little pecks until she finally turned to him with an annoyed glare. Couldn't he tell this was all new and overwhelming for her? She felt unsure of herself, not knowing what to do or how to act. When Si-hwa turned her around to face him again, she thought he wanted to kiss her, so she closed her eyes, ready for it. She figured she'd better get used to them kissing often now. But to her surprise, the boy just held her tightly, inhaling her scent deeply. Then he asked if this was a dream and if they were really together now. Eun-so blushed. Even though he couldn't see her face, she buried it against his chest and whispered, "Yes." She wanted to hug him back but felt too shy, so she just gripped the hem of his t-shirt. Si-hwa smiled and told her not to be shy, to hold him tight, really tight. Her heart pounded so hard she felt embarrassed, sure he could hear and feel every beat. Finally, she wrapped her arms around him, letting out a soft breath. For the first time, she felt happy. When they got to campus, Si-hwa asked Eun-so to text him when her classes were over. He'd wait for her. His face lit up with a bright smile as he said he wanted to take her out on a date. Later at practice, the girl was practically glowing with happiness, her smile giving her away. Hae-rang didn't need a single word to understand those two were officially a couple now. Eun-so blushed. Was it that obvious? A little later, Eun-so froze when she saw her now boyfriend again. She asked if he had another car, but Si-hwa just smiled and said he'd rented this one. Once inside, she looked around, wondering why on earth he needed to rent a car. Then she spotted the trunk packed with everything they'd need for a trip. Her jaw dropped and her cheeks flushed. Eun-so asked if they were going on an overnight trip. Her mind spun in circles. Everything was happening way too fast. Si-hwa beamed and said he'd planned a surprise for her. Besides, he already knew she loved to travel. Soon they arrived at their destination, and the girl was left speechless. They had arrived at a small camping site. Si-hwa smiled and reached out his hand to her, saying she loved forests and grass, and here it was. Half forest. Isn't it amazing here? Eun-so looked at him, still not fully believing this was happening to her. It all felt like something out of a fairy tale. Meanwhile, Hae-rang was heading home, wondering why Ji-hyun had skipped practice again. She really needed to tell him that Eun-so was now dating Si-hwa. Judging by her friend's face, it was clear Ji-hyun no longer stood a chance. But then, out of nowhere, she saw her gorgeous Yu-an, and all other thoughts disappeared. She ran toward him with a bright smile on her face. Si-hwa and Eun-so stopped by a local supermarket to buy everything they needed for a barbecue. Si-hwa started tossing everything into the basket, more and more, while Eun-so panicked, saying it was way too much. Grinning, he said he didn't want to get drunk again, so they should skip the alcohol. But Eun-so argued that last time he didn't even drink that much, and she was the one who got tipsy. The guy admitted that he actually couldn't hold his liquor well, and that was news to Eun-so. Si-hwa suggested grabbing some ice cream, while she stood there wondering what he'd be like drunk. Soon, delicious meat and a variety of vegetables were sizzling on the grill. Si-hwa burned himself, and Eun-so immediately rushed to check his hand in worry. She reminded him that she had offered to grill the meat herself, but stopped mid-sentence when he suddenly went quiet and leaned closer to her face. He kept moving closer, and she thought he was about to kiss her again. So Eun-so closed her eyes, waiting to feel his lips, but felt only a soft breath brush against her cheek. When she opened her eyes, she saw a gentle smile on his face. He told her there had been a bug on her cheek. Then he smirked playfully and asked, "What's wrong?" "Did you think I meant something else?" Eun-so touched her cheek where she could still feel his warm breath and, blushing, mumbled that she wasn't thinking anything like that. Then she grabbed the tongs and said she'd grill the meat herself since Si-hwa was too spoiled to do it. But the guy quickly raised the tongs above his head and pulled her against him with his other arm. kissing her. A moment later, he pulled back, smiling slyly, and said, unlike her, he really had been thinking about something else. Eun-so froze, flustered and thrilled. The next second, the smell of burnt meat hit her nose, and she yelled that they were ruining everything. He just laughed and said they still had plenty more. Later that night, they sat in the open trunk of the car, enjoying the campfire. Eun-so said it reminded her of their childhood trips to the beach. Si-hwa teased her, saying she used to complain those trips were boring. She shot back that he was making that up. She puffed out her cheeks, just like she did when she was little. He leaned his head against hers, thinking to himself that Eun-so was still the same. She hadn't changed a bit. For a while, they just sat like that in silence, enjoying the quiet and each other's closeness. Then Eun-so suddenly asked why he was always leaning on her when he was taller and stronger. Si-hwa looked at her and said, "When you're in love, you want to touch the person you love." Her thoughts immediately spun in a different direction, and she blushed. What did he mean exactly by love and touch? Then Si-hwa wrapped both arms around her and slowly lowered her onto her back, asking if she didn't feel the same way. Before Eun-so could react, he laughed and gently pulled her down with him. They lay there in each other's arms, and it felt like Si-hwa was soaking in every second of it, while Eun-so's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. He felt how fast her heart was racing and how tense she was, so he teased her, asking if she was thinking weird things again. Looking at him now, Eun-so didn't know what to do. She was honestly deeply happy with him. They stayed like that, just lying together, admiring each other, and enjoying the moment. Then suddenly, Si-hwa gently stroked her cheek and whispered for her to kiss him. In the next moment, he closed his eyes, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. Eun-so's eyes sparkled. Last time, she'd kissed him first, just to get back at him, but now, he was waiting for her kiss. She pressed her palms against his shoulders to push herself up, feeling her hands tremble. Looking at him, she felt like her heart was about to burst. Si-hwa softly stroked her wrist and asked why it was taking her so long. Eun-so grumbled at him to wait. She closed her eyes and leaned in slowly. Sure, he could not only feel, but hear how hard her heart was pounding. Their lips inched closer and closer, her whole body trembling with nerves. Then, in a flash, his hand slid to the back of her head. He quickly closed the distance between them and kissed her. It caught Eun-so off guard. He had asked her to kiss him first. Their eyes met, and then he wrapped both arms around her, pulling her into a deep, lingering kiss. After a while, he pulled back with a mischievous grin and said, "Time's up." Si-hwa pulled her closer, slowly closing the distance between their lips. Blood was pounding in her ears. She hadn't even known she could feel something like this. His arms wrapped around her tightly yet gently, his hands roaming softly over her body. Suddenly, Si-hwa pushed her back a little and told her to stop and not move. Eun-so stared at him, confused about what just happened. He lay there, covering his face with his hand, then peeked at her shyly. He let out a heavy sigh and said they probably shouldn't have come here, Zyare. Then he flashed a sly smile at the still clueless girl and joked that doing that outside wasn't exactly comfortable. Eun-so flushed bright red and immediately jumped back, yelling, "What are you even saying? How can you say stuff like that so casually?" He laughed, trying to hold her as she squirmed and shouted for him to let her go. Clearly amused by her reaction, he assured her he wouldn't do anything. But Eun-so shot back that he was just a pervert, and she didn't believe him. She finally managed to break free, but had to use his leg to push herself up. That's when she froze, completely still. Si-hwa froze too, and an awkward, tense silence filled the space between them. Her thoughts were a chaotic mess. She didn't want to believe it, but she whispered, "Wait, what did I just touch? Was that you?" Si-hwa sat frozen, his mind ringing like church bells. Finally, Eun-so stood up, tucked her hair behind her ear, and awkwardly apologized, saying she didn't mean to. The guy pulled himself together, that sly grin spreading across his face again. He leaned back and said, "Well, what you touched definitely wasn't you." Eun-so thought about how she and Si-hwa had always been so similar. When they were little, she was even a bit taller, and through middle and high school, they were always about the same height. But now, looking at her hand, she couldn't wrap her head around how something could actually be that size. It was insane. She slapped her forehead, scolding herself for the kinds of thoughts she'd been having lately. Lying on her bed, she blamed it all on Si-hwa. It was his fault. Everything was moving way too fast between them. Eun-so thought they needed to be more careful, not to spend too much time alone together or things would escalate too quickly. Just as that thought crossed her mind, her phone rang. It was him. Why was he calling her from the room next door? Si-hwa asked what she was doing, and she said she was just lying down, thinking. Then he asked what she was thinking about. Her cheeks burned and she got flustered. She couldn't exactly tell him the truth, that she'd been thinking about that thing. He suddenly said he missed her and asked if he could come over. Just the thought of being alone with him in her room made her hold her breath. So Eun-so suggested meeting in the living room in a couple of minutes instead. Si-hwa stared at his phone, confused about why she suddenly sounded like some kind of secret agent making a deal. A few minutes later, Eun-so walked into the living room, determined to keep her distance and not lose her head again. Si-hwa was sitting on the couch, reaching out his hand to her, silently inviting her to sit beside him. She decided that holding hands was safe enough, but when she took his hand, he suddenly asked, "It's the real deal, right?" His question left her stunned. What on earth was wrong with this guy? The next moment, he tugged her hand and she lost her balance, falling right into his arms. Si-hwa kissed her on the cheek and explained that since she'd talked so mysteriously on the phone and arranged a meeting in the living room, he just had to mess with her a little. Eun-so blushed again, thinking he was such a trickster. She'd come here determined to keep her distance, and now here she was, sitting on his lap again. Noticing her flustered expression, he asked if he'd done something wrong. Eun-so quickly got off his lap, said everything was fine, and suggested they watch a reality show. They turned on a show where the goal was to make your opponent's heart race first. Whoever's heartbeat sped up lost. Eun-so kept sneaking glances at Si-hwa while the host explained that you could make someone's heart race by scaring them, making them laugh, or using a spicier method. Si-hwa sat there watching the show calmly, looking completely relaxed. Meanwhile, Eun-so couldn't stop the flood of inappropriate thoughts, and the more she thought, the more nervous she became about where things might be heading. Then their eyes met, and he definitely noticed that she'd been staring at him. In an instant, he leaned toward her with a sly look and asked, "What are you staring at like that?" Eun-so immediately tried to cover it up, saying she had no idea what he was talking about. She was just watching the show. Si-hwa smirked and said she'd sneaked a look at him about 26 times. She pouted, denying it and telling him not to exaggerate. He wrapped an arm around her and, still teasing, said she kept peeking at him and asked if she was some kind of perv. That made her blush bright red as she yelled, "How dare you say something like that about me?" Then, out of nowhere, Si-hwa asked, "Do you want to see it?" And it felt like the air around her vanished. She slowly turned her shocked eyes to him and whispered, "What? What did you just say?" He looked straight at her, a slight smile playing on his lips. He said that if she wanted, he could show her. For a few seconds, Eun-so's mind frantically tried to process what he'd just said. Deep down, she had to admit she was curious. That's why she kept thinking about it. But how could he ask her something like that so casually? Si-hwa kept his eyes on her face, reading every single thought written all over it. He gently tilted her chin up, locking eyes with her, and quietly said he wouldn't mind seeing it. Eun-so's eyes widened, and her pulse spiked. If they were on that show, she'd have already lost. Si-hwa slowly traced his thumb along her lower lip, and a shiver ran through her body like an electric current. Finally, in a shaky voice, she asked if he really wanted to see it. He stroked her cheek and asked if she was really going to show him. He just couldn't help himself. The way she furrowed her brows and hesitated made him want to tease her more. She looked way too cute. Then, out of nowhere, Eun-so looked up at him with her big, innocent eyes and whispered, "Just me?" Si-hwa hadn't expected the conversation to take that turn. He only meant to tease her again and make her blush, so for a moment he was at a loss for words. He lowered his hand to her neck and leaned closer as if about to kiss her. But instead, he slowly whispered in her ear, asking if maybe they should head to her room. Then he left a light kiss behind her ear, making her draw in a sharp breath. Emotions swept over them, and somehow, without breaking their embrace, they moved across the room. Eun-so clung tightly to his shoulders, her knees were shaking. He smiled, still holding her, and asked if she was really that nervous. He could feel the tension in her body. Eun-so didn't know what to say. How could she not be nervous? She was really trying to be careful. But looking into Si-hwa's face now, all her worries seemed to melt away. She leaned in, hugging him tighter, goosebumps spreading through her with every touch. Then she kissed him, pulling him with her. A thought flashed through her mind. She couldn't wait any longer. Step by step, still tangled up in each other, they made their way toward her room, until finally they collapsed onto the bed. Si-hwa gently took out her hair clip, letting her hair fall while Eun-so wrapped her arms around him. They were both lost in the moment. Beautiful desserts of waffles, ice cream, and strawberries sat on the table in front of the girls. Hae-rang proudly showed Eun-so the photo she'd taken of the desserts and asked if it wasn't a masterpiece. But today, Eun-so clearly wasn't paying attention. Not to the desserts, not to anything around her. Her friend asked excitedly if something had happened between her and Si-hwa. Maybe they'd fought? But Eun-so just said everything was fine. How could she even explain what was bothering her? She remembered last night and the way she'd been startled by what she'd seen. While Hae-rang happily dug into her dessert, completely clueless, Eun-so sat there terrified, wondering what she was going to do about it all. She grabbed her head in despair, blushing furiously. How was something like that even possible? She had no idea what to do. Hae-rang suddenly asked how their little nature trip with Si-hwa had gone and if maybe next time the whole club should go. The moment she mentioned the trip, the memories rushed back, and Eun-so almost fainted from the wave of heat that hit her. She buried her head on the table in frustration. What was wrong with her? Why did all her thoughts keep circling back to the same thing? Hae-rang kept chatting, saying how fun it sounded, but probably Ji-hyun wouldn't be able to join. He was too busy with his part-time jobs. Eun-so asked if he was really that busy, and if everything was okay with him. Her friend said he'd always worked a lot and lately hadn't even gone to the gym. That's when Eun-so suddenly remembered she still hadn't replied to his message. Even if it was late, she decided to text him back and ask how he was doing. Some time passed. She checked her phone, but he hadn't even read the message. Meanwhile, the club gathered for another practice, and as always, Hae-rang was thrilled that Yu-an had shown up. They decided to play baseball, and Eun-so asked if Si-hwa had ever played before. He said no, but wasn't the point just to hit the ball with the bat? They started playing, and Si-hwa awkwardly missed a bunch of balls, making Eun-so quietly giggle at him. Pouting, he handed her the bat, saying it was his first time playing anyway. Eun-so took her position, ready to show how it's done. The moment she saw the ball coming, she swung the bat perfectly. She hit every pitch, holding her head high in triumph. Si-hwa pouted like a little kid and muttered, asking when she'd learned to play baseball that well. A little later, as they were walking home, he showed her his red palms and fresh blisters. He complained that his hands hurt now. Eun-so thought it was no surprise. After all, he used to dream of becoming a pianist and had always taken great care of his hands. Then she remembered that night by the shore and the sadness in his voice when he told her he no longer played the piano. Overcome by emotion, Eun-so reached out and took his hand, wanting to ease his pain. Si-hwa was surprised. She usually didn't make the first move like that. She always got shy when it came to showing her feelings. Then, as if snapping back to reality, she quickly pulled her hand away, apologizing and saying that if his hand hurt, she probably shouldn't touch it. Blushing, Eun-so pulled her hoodie up to hide her face, but Si-hwa leaned down and said his hand still really hurt. It was still red. Then he held out his hand to her and said that when she held it, the pain faded. He asked her to take his hand again. She did, her cheeks turning red as she muttered that he was acting like a little kid. As they walked past a group of high schoolers, Si-hwa suddenly said he wished they'd graduated together. Looking at those students, Eun-so thought about how she'd never imagined their paths would drift apart. For some reason, she had always believed they'd study together and keep moving through life side by side. Even though she'd confessed her feelings to him back then, she still thought they'd stay friends forever. She could never have imagined that Si-hwa would suddenly move away without a word. No goodbye. No explanation, leaving all her messages unanswered. She used to be afraid to ask, but now it didn't feel as scary. Finally, she asked what had happened back then, why he'd left so suddenly. She explained that she didn't mean to blame him. She just wanted to know why. He was about to say something when suddenly they heard excited voices nearby. Someone shouted that actress Ji Ham was getting married. A couple of girls were talking excitedly about how she was marrying Kang Si-hwa, and the article even said they had a child. Si-hwa froze in place, unable to believe his father had decided to get married. The article said Ji Ham was marrying the president of the company that represented her. It was a full-blown scandal. Eun-so immediately understood who they were talking about and stared at her boyfriend in shock. The next moment, she felt Si-hwa squeeze their joined wrists tightly. She gently grabbed his hand and said it hurt. He looked at their hands with a strange, distant expression, as if in a trance. Then he snapped out of it, took her hand in both of his, massaging it and apologizing. He hadn't meant to hurt her. Eun-so quietly asked if those girls were talking about him and his dad. Si-hwa put on a casual expression and said, yeah, it was about his dad and his dad's secret lover. Later, sitting in her room, Eun-so carefully read the article and thought to herself how lucky it was that Si-hwa hadn't been mentioned in it. But what would happen to him now? Sometime later, sitting in the car, She silently watched him and thought that if his father really married that woman, it would mean Siwa and his father's lover would technically become one family. That was insane. Did his father really not care at all about his son's feelings? Why should Siwa find out about this from the news instead of his father directly? All the way to the university, Eun-so couldn't stop thinking about it, and Siwa could tell it was weighing on her. Even after they arrived, all she could think about was what she could possibly say to comfort him. Seeing the turmoil in her eyes, he gently took her hand. Siwa said he'd always known that woman existed, so this wasn't news to him. She didn't need to worry so much. He'd be fine. Then he shocked her by adding that, honestly, he didn't want to talk about it with her. He smiled and told her not to worry about it. But his words stung. She knew it wasn't true. She could see he wasn't fine. Why couldn't he just talk to her? Did he not trust her enough? Did he not feel safe around her? She told him she just cared about him. Siwa hugged her and softly told her not to worry. He really was fine. Eun-so had no choice but to hug him back and accept his answer. Later, she got a text from him saying he wouldn't be able to pick her up tonight because something came up. She thought it was okay. Maybe he just needed some time alone. After all, this news had been a real shock. But the truth was, he had lied. He wasn't okay. Last time, he'd been heartbroken, saying he couldn't stand seeing that woman in his mother's place. So how could he be okay now? Did he really not trust her at all? Eun-so shook her head, trying to push away the dark thoughts. That just couldn't be true. Suddenly, she spotted a familiar face and froze. All her thoughts shifted to someone else. It was Ji-hyun. He was about to get into his car when he suddenly felt someone's gaze and noticed Eun-so. She quickly walked up to him, saying it had been a while since they'd seen each other. Ji-hyun looked nervous, clearly not expecting to run into anyone he knew. Eun-so apologized for not replying to his message sooner, and he said it was fine. It wasn't anything important. Suddenly, a delicate woman's shoe appeared from the car. Then a woman's voice asked, "Who's that?" "Is she your girlfriend, Ji-hyun?" He frowned and snapped, asking why she'd gotten out of the car and was butting in. The woman touched his forehead with her hand, saying he shouldn't frown or he'd get wrinkles on that handsome face. Eun-so froze, watching the scene, a strange feeling stirring inside her. The woman in the black sunglasses looked oddly familiar. Even her voice rang a bell. Then realization hit her like a lightning bolt. The woman standing before her was Siwa's father's secret lover. Just then, Ji-hyun smiled, took off her sunglasses, greeted Eun-so, and said she was Ji-hyun's mom. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this review, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this story and what manhwa you'd like to see next. See you in the next installment.